welcome to Clock Spinning. This is the podcast of Magic's history as told card by card through the design of a cube. I'm your host, Austin, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Connor. How are you today, Connor?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to get started with one of my favorite sets of all time.
Yeah, I absolutely adore this set. So in this first episode, we're starting off with a bang. We're going to review, over the next few episodes, every single card in the original Champions of Kamigawa block. So that's all the cards in Champions of Kamigawa, all the cards in Betrayers of Kamigawa, and all the cards in Saviors of Kamigawa. And as we go through, we're going to rate each one, and we're going to start building a cube, and then we'll do a couple episodes where we winnow it down into something that's hopefully really playable, and also that kind of captures the feel of that original sort of strange period in Magic's history.
Why don't I introduce us a little bit to the Kamigawa block, and especially Champions of Kamigawa, which is the first set and the one that we're going to be kicking things off with today. So Kamigawa, as most of you probably know, is a Japanese mythology themed set. It's a very kind of top-down thematic design, and the design of the set really started with the flavor, and the design of the cards flowed from this Japanese mythology theme that Wizards of the Coast decided to go with right from the get-go. So as part of that, we have a lot of spirit creatures. We have a lot of arcane spells. Those spirits are called kami. We have a lot of cool and unusual creature types in this set, like samurai and ninja. There's some kind of strange tribes as well, like some snake people, the Soratami, who are kind of moon-themed people. So a lot of cool and unique different kinds of cards in this set.
This is probably one of the earliest of what Wizards calls top-down designs, meaning designs that start with a theme in mind more than a mechanical identity. And other examples are like Theros, which is Greek mythology themed, or Amonkhet, which is Egyptian. Unlike those sets, Kamigawa really doesn't start from the pop culture idea of Japan, or the original Kamigawa doesn't, I should say. The new Kamigawa set very much does. But the original Kamigawa starts from kind of an esoteric deep dive into Japanese mythology and folklore, rather than stuff that's more recognizable, through pop culture.
Right. And that's kind of one of the big controversies about Kamigawa, and one of the maybe lessons learned for Wizards coming out of it was that as cool as a lot of the cards and a lot of the ideas in Kamigawa are, they just cut a little bit too deep into Japanese mythology and didn't, some people say didn't really hit enough of the familiar elements of Japanese popular culture, or kind of Japanese iconography that at least a lot of players in the West would kind of recognize and grab onto right away. It's funny that you mentioned Amonkhet and Theros, because some of the other sort of thematic ideas that were on the short list while Kamigawa was being conceived of were an Egyptian theme, or kind of a Greek-Roman theme.
Really? I had no idea. Huh.
Yes. So they decided not to go with the Greek kind of Roman theme, because it felt like those sorts of ideas and designs were already pretty prevalent in Magic. But of course, we saw both Greek and Egyptian themes later on.
Yeah, considering what cash cow Theros in particular proved to be, I bet they're glad they didn't. We'll talk more in a bit about how this set was a commercial failure, but I bet they're glad they didn't squander the Greek mythology theme.
Yeah, or give up on that entirely.
Yeah.
So some of the other kind of cool and unique things about Kamigawa are a very big emphasis on legendary creatures. In fact, every rare creature in this set is a legendary. So that does mean that many of them are not very good. They're not very legendary feeling legendaries, but every single rare creature is legendary. We also have the fairly unusual flip cards, which are cards that kind of move from one state to another once you accomplish a certain goal. Really cool thematic cards, but fairly limited design-wise, and that's something that we'll get into too. And those flip cards are really, I think, emblematic of a lot of the set design of Kamigawa, in that they started with flavor, the designers started with flavor, and then they kind of built the mechanics to match. So like Austin said, this is a very top-down way of approaching the set. We start out with this idea of Japanese mythology. of a war between the spirits and the humans, and then created mechanics that would sort of fit into that storyline. So we have these unusual and very set specific mechanics like Soul Shift, Bushido, Ninjutsu, and all of these mechanics, while they're fairly interesting in a lot of ways, they're also very parasitic, meaning that they really only play well with other cards from exactly Kamigawa and are not easily translated into sets that come after them, and don't really play very well with cards that were printed before them either.
Yeah, something you said in there about flip cards of being emblematic. Another way in which I'd say they're emblematic is in a lot of ways this set was very innovative in Magic's history. There's all kinds of ideas that are first explored here that later became really important. Like, for example, having subtypes on instant sorceries. That we wouldn't see that again for quite a long time. I believe all the way till Strixhaven. But playing with type lines, for example, is a big part of Magic's design space now. Or flip cards are kind of a poorer implementation of transforming cards, or cards that physically you turn them over, and those are some of the most popular cards in Magic's history. Werewolves and the gods and all kinds, and the flipwalkers. Flip cards are modern transforming cards are tremendously popular, and I feel like that's sort of a theme throughout this set, is like close but not quite. Or legends are another one, right? Like Magic today is EDH first. That's the most popular format in the game. That revolves around legends, and Kamigawa says, great, legends are awesome, before EDH is a thing. So there's this funny way in which Kamigawa was a little bit too early and just doesn't quite land a lot of its design experiments 100% on the first try.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Another way that it really differs from modern Magic is that there are basically no gold cards in this entire block, which means that there is a real lack of mana fixing, and it can be very difficult with the cards in this set, to really effectively play in multiple colors, because you just don't have a lot of land that are going to allow you to get a wide variety of colors. You don't have really any gold cards that you're trying to fit in.
Yeah, the entire mana fixing for this block, I believe, is allied tap lands and Tendo Ice Bridge, which can be used once to fix for a color. It's pretty brutal. I mean, we'll see when we get through all the spells, but I kind of suspect we might have to go outside of Kamigawa block just to make the mana in this cube workable.
Yeah.
So you might be asking, listening to all this, like, why are we doing this? Like, I don't know if it sounds like we're down on Kamigawa, but I'll say we're both very nostalgic, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But we're also not. I wouldn't say blinded by nostalgia. I think we see this set as interesting and experimental and very cool. And also, it made a lot of big swings and many of them didn't land. So it's kind of an interesting set to talk about and to design from, purely because it wasn't a slam dunk. This isn't Innistrad. This isn't Ravnica. This isn't something that just 100% landed, that the audience loved, that sold 1 million copies. There's a lot of obscure cards in here. There's weird ideas that weren't revisited for a long time. And that's got a lot of rough edges, but I think it's a big part of the charm of the set too. Also, this just came at a formative period for us in our Magic the Gathering, I guess, lives. We were maybe a year or so into playing Magic when this came out.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And I'd say this is when we started to get serious. Like Betrayers of Kamigawa was our first pre-release. I'd say this is the first set I really grokked and gelled with. Like, I started with Onslaught and I kind of got it, but I was just learning the game. And then Mirrodin was cool to me, but also Mirrodin is a mechanically complex and sort of thematically strange set, all the artifacts and stuff. So I think this was the first one where I was like, I get the flavor, I get what they're trying to do with the cards. It's cool. I like it. It's weird. It really spoke to me when I was getting into Magic.
Yeah, kind of in the long arc of Magic history, it was also a pretty weird time for us to start playing. So we started back at some point during Onslaught block. I don't know exactly where we started in there or what sets had come out, but we started playing in Onslaught. And then, of course, came Mirrodin and then Kamigawa. And Onslaught was the last block for a while where Magic took place on the plane of Dominaria. So up until this point in the game's history, all of Magic sort of fit within...
well, nearly all. Don't forget about Homelands and Old Grotha.
Nearly all. Almost all of it was on Dominaria. and kind of fit into these themes that were very familiar to the game, particular tribes that people had a lot of fondness for. And then we kind of came into the game right as they were jumping away from that and going to these strange new worlds like Mirrodin, like Kamigawa, like Ravnica. And just kind of looking back on that now, it's, we sort of missed out on this whole era of Magic because, we would have been like 5 back then.
Yeah.
We missed out on this whole era of Magic where, things were all happening in this one thematic space. And then we came in right as things started to get weird.
Well, and Dominaria is like, it has like a tech edge to it, but it's fairly like classic kind of high fantasy in a lot of ways.
Right.
And it kind of veers between high and low fantasy, and there's some tech stuff with Urza and Mishra and building mechs and so on. But in a lot of ways, it's pretty classic fantasy. And then you go to Mirrodin, and it's like almost sci-fi. And then you go to Kamigawa, and it's like this, like a dark Japanese folklore story. Like that kind of huge thematic jump from set to set was so exciting to me as someone getting into the game. I think particularly someone coming in from Pokemon and then Yu-Gi-Oh, both of which are they're fine enough games, but the way Magic played with mechanical depth, so much from set to set, and with like kind of thematic depth and world building was just really exciting to me.
Yeah, it was a cool time for us to jump into this game.
I'll also say, I think this is maybe the prettiest block in the history of Magic from an art perspective. I mean, almost every piece of art in this set is weird or fantastical or just beautifully rendered. There's a few duds, of course, but for the most part, this must have the highest percentage of hits for me, art-wise, maybe in the entire game.
Yeah, the art in this set is so good, and if only we could be showing all of you the cards as we're looking at them, but we're probably going to say a lot. Just go look at this card, go look at this art, and it really will be worth it, because if you're not familiar with the set and with the cards in it, there are some true gems here.
Particularly the spirit designs or the kami designs are so fantastical and so strange. They play with concepts of horror. They play with just like, I don't even know. I don't know if it was really strong art direction or if the artist just ran wild, but every kami looks totally unique. Very few of them fall into traditional kind of humanoid or monster type body types. They're all, there's huge floating collections of eyeballs and purple masses. There's like scaly law tablet lizard creature. Like it's hard to even describe them. You just have to see them.
Yeah, and as cool as they were and are, that's probably also part of the reason why this set struggled to really be very much of a hit, because like these are just some really weird cards. A lot of them have really strange and unfamiliar names, really strange art, and thematically it's a weird set that does not really fit in with most of the rest of Magic.
Yeah, I think the other thing that really doomed it was this is one of the weakest sets in the game's history, certainly one of the weakest sets in the modern era, modern border era. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Kamigawa was punished for Mirrodin's sins. So the block before this, Mirrodin, is one of the most powerful sets in the history of Magic. It had one of the most broken standard environments in the history of Magic. And the game was shedding players, particularly competitive players who at this time Wizards cared about a lot more than they do now, at a really tremendous clip, because it was just really not fun. And so they backpedaled tremendously with Kamigawa on power. And they went so far in the other direction that I think it hurt sales even more. Players complain about power creep, but they hate weak sets even more. And I think honestly, more than the thematic stuff, I think it was the fact that a lot of these cards are weak and just didn't make much of a splash that really sealed the doom of Kamigawa. Although there are tremendously powerful cards kind of hidden in here. There's all kinds of gems in here that are still played in EDH and Eternal formats to this day.
I think that building a cube in particular is a really cool way to highlight the cards that are not just dogs in this set.
Yeah.
And to, kind of recreate and relive some of the really cool ideas and themes that were explored here. Building a cube gives us a chance to kind of curate all of these cards into the ones that are not just, meaningful and nostalgic and fun for us, but that would be interesting to kind of play with and experiment with, and, play in this kind of limited format of Kamigawa, give these cards a chance to play against other cards that are not as strong, and just hopefully give them a chance to shine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on and talk about the IMPAB rating system that we're going to use to make sense of the hundreds and hundreds of cards that we'll be discussing over the course of the block.
All right, so I'll be introducing our patent-eligible IMPAB rating system. IMPAB, which is of course a word we made up, stands for Instacut, Meh, Playable, Auto-Include, and Build-Around. So I'll say just a little bit about each of those. Instacut pretty much speaks for itself. These cards are either really, really weak, which is true of a lot of cards in Kamigawa, or maybe they're just way too specific for the cube and, just aren't really going to find a place, aren't really going to shine. So these cards we're just going to cut right away. We're not going to be looking back at them at any later point.
Yeah, and I'd say a lot of times the big sin of these cards is just that they're boring. They're like, a lot of them, it's just the cards that you're never going to be excited to see in the packs. You're never going to be excited to include in your deck. They're just kind of meh.
And we may be just a little bit biased about cards that we were never excited to see in packs way back in the day. So those are the Instacuts. M stands for Meh. So these cards aren't good, but they're not necessarily awful. There may be a place for them here and there. So they're not so terrible that you never want to see them come up in the cube, but usually not that great. So we may revisit these at some point down the line as we're sort of refining and shaping the cube. We may find we need more cards of this type or less cards of this type, so they're not quite Instacuts, but they're not great. P stands for Playable. So these are cards that are generally playable in most circumstances. They're usually pretty all-around solid cards that could, find a place in many different types of decks, or, maybe they're really good in a particular kind of deck that we're trying to encourage in the cube. So playable cards are playable. A stands for Auto Include. So these are, of course, the cards that we know we want to include in the cube. So these cards might be particularly iconic for the story or the flavor of a set. But usually they are going to be in there because they're really, really good. Or they represent kind of a particular archetype that we know we want to see in the cube. So a lot of auto includes in Kamigawa in particular, I think, are not going to be the kind of bombs that you would see printed nowadays. And it'll be important to kind of keep in mind as we're going through this set that the power level in Kamigawa is very, very different from what we see in Magic today. So what we may rate an auto include now would probably not be one if it was printed in a modern set.
Yeah, I would say a 2-mana 2/2 with a minor upside ability for this era is probably would be right at playable. The bar for power is set pretty low.
Yeah, that might be somewhere between playable and auto include for me.
I hope not that bad.
And then last but not least, and probably most interestingly, we have B for Build Around. So this is kind of the trickiest category in our very sophisticated system. These cards are, often the fun, kind of weird, maybe Johnny type cards that could be pretty powerful in the exact right circumstance. Or they might be just an interesting card to have in the cube, something we think we may want to try out, something that could be the centerpiece of a particular kind of deck. They're sort of in there as cards that may need to be revisited later on as the cube gets, revised and looked at, and we figure out whether we can actually build a deck around these cards.
Yeah, I think of these as the kind of cards that send you on sort of a mini quest in the draft. You see them come around, you maybe a couple picks in, you go, oh, this is really pushing me towards Samurai. Can I make that deck work? Those kind of cards that help give drafters an idea where to go, or maybe send them down a fun path they wouldn't otherwise have taken.
Yeah, I like that. And those probably are some of the first build around cards we're going to see are some Samurai.
That's right. Yeah,
hopefully would make you think when you're drafting them, maybe I want to make a Samurai deck here. Aside from our IMPAB rating system, we're also going to be considering which cards should maybe have multiple copies in the cube. And this is going to be something that's a little bit tricky and something that will need to be, definitely refined as we go through this whole process. But we are, considering the idea of having multiple copies of many cards show up in the cube, both to encourage particular archetypes to emerge, and because some cards are just going to be ones that we want to see more of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should say, some cubes, draft set cubes in particular, are designed to simulate a retail draft environment. So, for example, you'll see cubes where it's like we're including 4 of every common, 2 of every uncommon, 1 of every rare, and 1 of every mythic. We're not setting that up, this cube up that way. We intend it to be a little more, I guess, opinionated than that. There's cards we just dislike that we're just not going to include. There's other cards that we might weigh more heavily just because we think they're fun. A simple example might be we're going to talk about Isamaru, Hound of Konda, which is like a staple white weenie card. He's a rare, but he might get in here multiple times, as an example. So we're playing fairly fast and loose with the multiples, and we're not going to look as closely at rarity on this as you'd see in a traditional set cube.
Right. So one other thing we want to mention about the cube is that we have it posted on Cube Cobra. So it's up there for everybody to see and to kind of follow along as we talk about all these cards and rate them. So after each episode, we'll be going in there and updating that list of cards with the ratings based on the IMPAB system, except for the Instacuts, which are just going to disappear after every episode. So we would love for all of you to follow along as we kind of put this cube together, cut cards, rate cards. And of course, we would love to hear from you on your thoughts, maybe your ratings for some of the cards that we're talking about.
Yeah, or cards that are coming up. If you know a favorite card's coming and you want to try to put your thumb on the scales, feel free.
Absolutely. And we'll be, like I said, we'll be updating that after each episode, and a link to that will be in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. And just a little bit on the logistics of how we implement this system. So we've each gone through a spoiler list of each card in the set, and we've rated them independently. So we're each coming in blind as to what the other person said, and then part of the fun here is finding out, oh wow, you had that at playable. I think that's an Instacut, and then sorting that through together, and then we'll land together on a final rating, which is the one that we'll tag the cards with on Cube Cobra.
So I think without further ado, we should just jump into the white cards of Kamigawa.
All right, our very first card of Kamigawa block, Blessed Breath. So Blessed Breath is a single W for an instant arcane. So it's an instant with the arcane subtype. And it says target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And you can splice it onto arcane for a W. And what splice onto arcane does, if you don't know, is as you play an arcane spell, you may reveal this card from your hand and may pay its splice cost. If you do, add this card's effects to that spell. So basically, you can join this spell onto another spell, in this case for a single W. So it's a W, give something protection, or you can tack it onto another arcane spell for a single W. This is an interesting card to start with because it shows off a lot of what's weird and wonderful about Kamigawa block, and also shows some of the serious nerfing, serious powering down that happened with Kamigawa block that we're just going to see continue definitely through all the white cards in the set.
For sure. This felt like a really underwhelming card to be starting with. I mean, it lets us introduce a couple of Kamigawa specific keywords and mechanics, but just to me really, really unexciting.
Yeah, let's just get our ratings out there, and then we can talk about why. So I have this down as a meh, and probably in a single copy. I don't think this is terrible. Protection is fine. It can fizzle a removal spell. It can let you chip in for some damage, and having splice is actually kind of interesting because you could chain this 2 or 3 times over a couple of turns. Maybe get some decent value out of it. I don't think it's totally unplayable.
Yeah, and it is nice that the splice is just 1 mana. It's not like you're having to hold a lot open to be able to get your Blessed Breath value in.
Yeah, actually, I think I heard you snicker just a little bit at the name, and I feel like we do have to talk about that. The name of this is funny. It's really hard to say Blessed Breath. Every time I say it, I just I'm stumbling. And then the art is incredible. It's like this, I don't know what I'd call him, like a kind of moth priest figure raising his arms in the air and then just breathing out this cloud of yellow gas. It's a pretty extraordinary picture, which is going to be a theme through this set. Is almost every piece of art is at least solid, and in many cases just exceptional in one way or another.
Yeah, he kind of, I assume this is a Kami that we're looking at that's doing this. He kind of has some tentacle looking things coming out of his tentacle arms also. But yeah, great. I gave this a meh also. I feel, and maybe just a single copy, I feel like this, could have a place in a spirit focused deck. It's not going to break the game at all. But yeah, it could be fun.
Yeah, I think the other thing we're going to find out through playtesting is like, do the colors work out for this, right? I want to have some splice synergies in there for sure. It's a cool mechanic. It's an iconic mechanic. I'm not sure that the white cards are where we're going to find the decent splice effects. And so it could end up that this is just a little too orphaned, if there just aren't enough decent white cards, white arcane spells to splice onto. And they kind of have to be instances, the other thing, right? Like splicing this onto a sorcery is fine, but definitely not as good as splicing onto an instant.
This card really, I think highlights how parasitic the mechanics in this set are. Mark Rosewater uses this term a lot when he's talking about Kamigawa block. The idea of parasitic mechanics, meaning that they cannot be used and don't have any meaningful application outside of just this one set. And Splice and Arcane are just the perfect example of that, because obviously Splice as a mechanic just does nothing if you don't have arcane spells. And Arcane itself is, this kind of tag that you put on a sorcery or an instant that has appeared in no other set besides Kamigawa. It doesn't appear in the block before Mirrodin or the block after Ravnica. There aren't that many spirits in Mirrodin for sure. There's maybe a few, hanging out in Ravnica, but this card is just useless outside of Kamigawa.
Yeah, it is kind of an orphaned mechanic for sure. I was actually wondering, Splice itself is such an interesting mechanic, and I'm fascinated that they've never returned to it. And really, outside of Lorwyn block, they haven't returned to the idea of instants and sorceries having subtypes until I think Strixhaven had a little bit. But it's fascinating that there's this whole pretty adventurous avenue of design that they opened with Kamigawa that never really has been reopened.
Even just today, we'll be seeing, quite a lot of adventurous designing and cool mechanics and sort of experimentation from Magic that you definitely hadn't seen before this set. And I kind of wonder how much the company looked at this set after its not that great commercial success and wondered, if these parasitic mechanics and these sort of wild ideas being put out there were just too much.
Right. Yeah, I am remembering that in Modern Horizons, there were 2 or 3 instances with Splice onto instant or sorcery, including the punerific. Yeah, the best one is Splicer's Skill, which references the splicers that interact with golems in Mirrodin. And so it's a Splicer's Skill. It creates a golem token, and it splices onto instant or sorcery, which someone in R&D just had a wonderful pun field day with that. So they revisited it in a tiny, tiny way, but very little for a mechanic that seems so versatile and interesting. Like, I don't know why Splice on Instant and Sorcery hasn't just become a mechanic they return to over and over.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, I think we've probably managed the world's longest conversation about Blessed Breath. You ready to move on?
We have.
A final rating, meh?
Yeah, we both said meh, so this is a meh.
Solid meh.
Okay, let's move on to our first samurai, Bushi Tenderfoot / Kenzo the Hard-Hearted. This is a flip card. So it's hard to describe what this card looks like if you're not familiar with the Kamigawa flip cards. This card and every other flip card has its art in the center of the card, one text box above that art, and a separate text box below that art. In this case, each of those text boxes representing a different creature. So when you play this card, it comes in as one of those creatures. And when a certain condition is met, you flip this card over. You sort of turn it 180 degrees, and it becomes the creature on the other end of the card. Here's what Bushi Tenderfoot does. It's 1 white mana for a 1/1 human soldier. When a creature dealt damage by Bushi Tenderfoot this turn is put into a graveyard, flip Bushi Tenderfoot. You flip him over, and you get Kenzo the Hard-Hearted, who is a legendary human samurai, 3/4, with double strike and Bushido 2. And since this is our first Bushido card, I'll go ahead and read that out too. Bushido says when this blocks or becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So there's a whole lot packed into this card, a whole lot of Kamigawa specific goodness. Really cool card. A lot of one-off mechanics here, and our first samurai also.
Yeah, I almost feel like we need a little pressy for people. So that's a 1-mana 1/1 that if it kills the thing without dying, flips into a 3/4 with double strike and Bushido 2.
Correct.
Oof. What's your take on this card? Because I love this guy. I mean, I think it's super cool. It tells a story. You know, he turns from just the humble soldier into the badass super samurai guy. But I actually think this card is stone unplayable. I don't think it could make the cut.
Yeah, I think he is really terrible, but I have such a soft spot for this card because so many of these cards I remember actually getting them in packs, trying to make decks out of them, trying to make them work. And this is just a perfect example of a card where I wanted it to work so bad. You have this 1/1 where if you can just get him to deal enough damage to a creature to put it into a graveyard and prevent him from dying at the same time, then you get this 3/4, double striking Bushido 2 awesome legendary samurai. It felt like if I could just figure out the right combination, this card would be so great. But it's not so great. It's, I think, a pretty terrible card.
Yeah, it is worth noting. I mean, the flip is pretty great. A 3/4 double strike is already pretty solid, and you add Bushido 2. That's a really strong body, especially by this set's standards, where we're going to see there's a lot of 5-mana 2/2s in the set. Like Kenzo the Hard-Hearted, if you somehow flip this, is a really powerful guy.
Yeah, it's the somehow if you flip it part that's a little tricky.
Yeah, and I did some digging on that. So this guy's at a minimum, you got to get him up to 2 toughness, right? Because it's a 1/1. I mean, I guess there's like a 0/1 in the set that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but unless your opponent somehow decides to throw their 0/1 pointlessly under Bushi Tenderfoot's tender feet, basically you have to at least boost his toughness to 2. And by my count, there's only 21 cards in the whole block that can do that, many of which are terrible, one of which is Umezawa's Jite, which I don't think we can put in the cube because it will break the cube in half. So like I just don't know if we even have the tools to make this guy work.
Yeah, I really wish I was trying to think of anything that might buff samurai, and then I realized Bushi Tenderfoot isn't even a samurai yet. He hasn't had that training. He's just a soldier.
He hasn't proven himself on the battlefield.
No, he doesn't have that armor. He doesn't have that katana, so you can't even rely on samurai buffs, of which there are surprisingly few in this set anyway. That said, I've always loved this and pretty much all of the flip cards. One of the interesting things that Mark Rosewater has said about these flip cards is that they are really great for storytelling. There's a very clear story being played out by this card. You have this, young, untrained, untested Tenderfoot soldier.
I love that name. Tenderfoot.
It's a great name.
Evocative.
And once he gets that experience on the battlefield, once he defeats his first opponent, however you want to put it, then he becomes this hard-hearted great warrior, legendary samurai. So there's a lot of storytelling that's happening in this card, but they, just because of the layout of the card and the physical limitations of a Magic card, there's very little space to include both good art and very much rules text. So all of the flip cards have really very little rules text on them and very little space for that many abilities or that much interesting stuff going on them. They obviously don't have any space for flavor text.
You can't call them anything but cramped. You just look at it and there's right. So much text that the rules text is, or the rules text box is tiny. The art is tiny. And because there's 2 figures in the art, like each figure in the art is like literally a postage stamp or smaller. Like it's just, they're very cramped, and they just hadn't thought of the idea of physically flipping a card over in terms of how you would make that playable from a design perspective. Like checklist cards and sleeves weren't as common back then. There were all these mechanical things. And then also I think they literally couldn't print them and collate cards correctly for a true flip card. And so they tried to do it with these, and I could see why it's been a one-off experiment. Like Splice, I feel like there's a lot you could return to, but once you think of the idea of an actual flip card where you physically flip the card over and there's room to breathe, there's no reason to revisit this.
Yeah, design. There's no reason to come back to this. I don't think we mentioned before, but you alluded to there being 2 figures in this art. The art for this card and all of the flip cards, the box that the artwork is contained in is already smaller than it is on a normal Magic card. And then you have this kind of split canvas going on where on the left half of it, if you're looking at the card right side up, the left half is, artwork associated with the top part of the card, and then the right-hand side, which is upside down from this perspective, is associated with the bottom part of the card. So you're flipping not just the rules text, but the art as well, or the part of the art that you're sort of focusing on. So they're very, very strange looking cards.
Yeah, the other challenge of flip cards is, as Mark Rosewater mentions in his podcast, there's a serious playability issue because once you tap a magic card, it starts to get a little bit messy to kind of read the board and understand, is this currently a Bushi Tenderfoot? Is this a Kenzo the Hard-Hearted? If you have a chaotic evil opponent who, taps to the left, then all bets are off. But even without that, it's really easy to create a memory issue and to feel bad, or like just some really awkward play moments from just manipulating these cards on the battlefield, or holding it in your hand, having to flip the card upside down to read what the other side does. It's a little bit of a tell.
If you can't remember what it does.
Yeah. So where do you land on Kenzo the Hard-Hearted and Bushi Tenderfoot? I have him as an insta-cut, which feels harsh. I'm willing to go up if we want to give him a shot, although I just don't know if he can make the big leagues.
I put him down as meh, and I think I'm going to stick to meh a little bit because I don't know off the top of my head how many 1-mana creatures we have in this set, but I suspect it's not all that many.
Working on it.
Just because he's a 1-mana 1/1 who could possibly be doing something, I'm going to stick to meh.
There are 29 1-drops in this block, including 7 white ones. No, 8 white ones, some of which are bad.
Okay. Well,
none of which are actually worse.
This is one of the bad ones, but
none of which are worse than his front face, to be honest with you.
Is he the worst?
Is he the worst just looking purely at his front face?
Probably not. Probably yes.
Yes. Yes, he is. But I'm willing to still give him a meh. We put him into the cube. He never gets drafted. Eventually, he quietly gets cut. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
All right.
If he never proves himself in battle, then
yeah, exactly. We'll give him a chance. We'll give him a chance, like Bushi Tenderfoot himself was given a chance, or Kenzo. I guess that we know his name. All right, let's move on to Cage of Hands, which is an evocative name. Cage of Hands is 2 and a W for an enchant creature. And it says, enchanted creature can't attack or block. And you can pay 1 and a W to return Cage of Hands to its owner's hand. So it's what we now call an Aura, a 3-mana Aura. I think this card is an auto-include. I think this is likely to be one of the best pieces of removal in the set. I haven't gone to audit that completely. But 3-mana stop a thing is like a decent rate in this format because this is a really slow format. As I said earlier, there are 4, 5, 6-mana plays that will have 2 or 3 power. Like, it takes a while for decks to get going. So 3 mana normally would be very slow, but here I think it's fine. And the fact that you can pick it back up and put it on another creature at any time and basically lock your opponent out of their best creature at any given time, I think is pretty dang good. So I have this as an auto-include.
Yeah, I agree. I rated it playable, but I think auto-include's fair.
I absolutely love the art here. It's something I think I've already said. We're going to keep returning to it over and over again. But the thing I really like here is they really went wild with the kind of world design and art design in Kamigawa. The theme of Kamigawa is that the spirits have gone to war with the mortals. They really took the spirit design, and they're not just like spooky ghosts or kind of dragons or these kind of classical images. They're weird. Like, so this one is hundreds of hands surrounding this beast with kind of eyeballs, like purple flat disc eyeballs floating around them. It's disturbing. It's claustrophobic and a little bit spooky, and just, yeah, it really is evocative. And I love this art.
Yeah. If you look closely at a lot of these hands also, a lot of them are kind of, don't have kind of the typical finger orientation. There's a lot of just floating fingers kind of hanging out around the hands.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, there are just some kind of fractured pieces of hand and finger.
Right.
Oh,
yeah,
it's so good.
It's really bizarre, but I'll be honest with you. I like this card art, but I always found it very confusing because to me, the thing that the Cage of Hands is around.
Oh, I had the same thoughts. Yeah, I think we're going the same direction. Go.
Yeah, looking at it now, I think it's probably an Oni, which would be maybe part of the mortal world in the Kamigawa lore. But it looks like this. My gut reaction, my first reaction when I saw this card years and years ago was that this was a Kami.
Or nothing. It kind of just doesn't look like anything in Kamigawa to me.
No,
it looks more like
really
a just
doesn't.
beast.
Yeah, just sort of a, ambiguous beast
Huh.
that would appear in another set. But, I was very confused by this card at first because it looked like some spirits trapping another spirit. And I found that confusing, but
well, I mean, it can trap another spirit, which is unusual. I'm almost surprised it doesn't say enchant non-spirit creature or something like that. But maybe they didn't have that technology back then before, auras worked a little bit differently. The artist here is Mark Tadine, who goes all the way back to Alpha with pieces like Chaos Orb, Time Twister, Time Vault, Soul Ring. And he's continued with Magic right, up to the present day. More recent pieces that are iconic are like Umbrakel, the Aeon's Torn, which I guess isn't that recent, but I've been playing Magic for a while and it feels like that's yesterday. Yeah, really, really great piece of art from one of Magic's great artists.
Yeah.
But on playability, so it sounds you're not all the way to auto include, but you definitely think this is playable.
Yeah, at least playable.
So you have this as a single. I think I didn't actually put a number in, but I feel like this is like a maybe something we'd run 2 of. Like I think removal's going to be pretty scarce in the format, and this seems like a good kind of slower removal option to have access to.
Yeah, I'd be fine with saying 2 of this to start with.
All right. Anything else to say about Cage of Hands?
No, I think we've handled it pretty thoroughly.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's go to Call to Glory. This is 1W for an instant. It says untap all creatures you control, samurai you control, get +1/+1 until end of turn. This is our first samurai synergy card. The art on here shows just basically a bunch of samurai just charging right at the viewer. And they're all getting +1/+1. So we had pretty divergent ratings for this card.
I think I'm wrong, to be honest. I have this as playable. I'll expose my vulnerable flank.
Thank you for that, because I gave it an insta-cut.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this, given the number of samurai that anyone is likely to have in play at any given moment, giving them all +1/+1 for 1 turn for 2 mana doesn't feel all that great. And that's assuming you have any samurai. If you don't, all this is doing is untapping all creatures you control. So maybe that could be a nice way, a nice little combat trick of, swinging in and then a surprise blocking your opponent on their next attack.
Well, I'm going to untap myself and give myself +1/+1 and coming in the defense of this card, because I think it's a little better than just like kind of a nice trick. I mean, don't you feel like there's some blowout potential here? Like you really get them where you... See, now I'm already struggling.
But how much? I mean, how much do you get them? You got 4 samurai in play, and you get like that's best case scenario. I feel like.
I guess I'm focused more on the untap all creatures you control part, like the ability to kind of blow out on defense. I think the problem is I'm thinking about is like, to me that sounds like I'm describing a parity board state. Where you and your opponent are kind of equally stalled, and I feel like in that situation you're not swinging out anyway. And your opponent isn't swinging out. So maybe it's not good.
I mean, if you combine this with Hold the Line, which we'll get to a little bit later, it could be a real blowout. If we have to combine this with
Hold the Line to make this good, then I don't think this makes the grade.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe be willing to go up to meh on this just because I like Samurai.
Maybe just throw in 1 and see if it ever
why don't we say something. Single and meh?
Yeah, I feel like I think a single meh is fine, because I think we're going to be trying stuff out, and the early draft of the cube is going to be rough, and there will be this honing process, and we'll find out the Call to Glory is OP or more likely that it's terrible.
Yeah, we'll find out. We'll see who's right.
Great. Anything more to say about Call to Glory?
I had it in a samurai deck way back in the day. I can't remember it ever making any difference for me.
I was going to say this can help Bushi Tenderfoot, but of course it can. He's not a samurai. He's
not a samurai.
Brutal. All right. Let's talk about Candle's Glow, a card I had never seen until we did these ratings. 1 and a W for an instant arcane. Prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt to target creature or player this turn. You gain 1 life for each damage prevented this way. And you can splice it onto Arcane for 1 and a W. So 2 mana, prevent up to 3 damage, gain that much life, and you can splice it. I had this as an insta-cut, and I sneakily changed it to a build around, because there's I think this card is almost certainly terrible, but I think there's a chance this card is actually kind of annoying, and you could build a deck almost around a bunch of Candles Glows, a bunch of other stally kind of instants and sorceries, and just like stall your opponent out of the game and bore them to death. Like, I don't know exactly how you win in that scenario, but I feel like there's maybe some playability hidden inside this card. Am I nuts?
I mean, I guess the question is, do we want that to be represented in the cube? You know,
okay, yes, I'm going to answer that firmly, yes, because
okay.
I think part of the, to me, part of the, like there's cards in this era that are tough and that are frustrating and create weird board states, and I think we have to nod at that. I think we totally cut it. We're not doing justice to it.
Okay, that's
not sold.
That's fair. That's fair, but yeah, I could actually kind of see Candles Glow maybe in a deck with maybe if you're able to get the Honden, some Honden in there, you know, you get the white Honden, which gives you life every turn, and then maybe you've got one or two other colors in there as well. Then you're just sort of
we got Ethereal Haze coming up. That's like a fog effect.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Wait, actually, that doesn't work because it'll prevent the damage. So never mind.
You get some of this protection from color in there. Some of the great tapping effects that we're gonna get coming up later. I'm trying to help you here.
You're trying to help me, and I'm talking. So this is actually making me think. So I think one of the problems I'm facing, and that we will face continually, is like this is a really depowered set.
Yes.
Like cards in Kamigawa are really weak, like really, really weak by modern Magic standards, but they were weak even by the standards of the time. And so I think it's going to make it tricky, particularly in the early stages, to evaluate cards. Yeah. And I'm not saying that this card is great, but I do think it might be like in this very slow, very grindy format. There might be something you can do with it that's interesting.
As I'm looking at it more and looking at it especially as potentially a 6-point life swing for 2 mana and something that you can splice, you know, this annoying thing you can keep around if you have some arcane spells. Yeah, I think we should cut it in or keep it in.
Well, a
little Freudian slip there.
Okay, I want to talk about the art in a second, but let me push you just a little bit further, because I also feel like if this goes in, it should be like 3x or 4x. Like, I feel like you need a lot of copies. I think basically we should flood the cube, have it be 20% copies of Candles Glow. I mean, not really, but I almost feel like you need a lot of them to see if this can work. Because I think one of these is like, why? Like, you almost need to build a terrible deck around it for it to work.
Yeah. Well, then why don't we just go whole hog and put 4 in?
4 copies of Candles Glow.
4 copies of Candles.
It's a build around. It's
the first Kamigawa cube with 4 copies of Candles Glow.
The first pile of Magic cards that was not bulk that has 4 copies of Candles Glow.
We're breaking new ground here.
We really are.
All right, so we need to pay extra attention to every other arcane instant that we see coming up in white as something that Candles Glow could be spliced onto.
Yes. Do you have anything to say about the art? I kind of like, so let me describe it. It's, I guess I would describe it as kind of a moon or a sun that's like it's like a yellow molten ball with a freaky face, surrounded by floating candles in a cloud of lightning. And there's also fireballs. I guess. I don't think I like this art. It's definitely striking and sort of unforgettable. I don't really know how this prevents damage either. Like the term Candles Glow kind of sounds like it would prevent damage. It sounds cozy. This art though is like anything but cozy. It's kind of horrific. It definitely doesn't look like it's preventing damage. I don't know. It's profoundly strange.
It's really confusing art. Like, to me, this whatever this angry face in the middle is, it looks like a moon or a sun. It's like the man in the moon is being like melted down.
Yes.
And he's very upset about it, which raises this question. This is an arcane spell, right? So this is a spell being cast by the spirits, the spirit world.
Yes.
And in that case, these spirit candles are surrounding what, I wasn't sure on Cage of Hands, but I'm pretty sure whatever this guy is in the middle of this art is a spirit.
Oh, you think he's suffering? I feel like
He
he's
seems
the
to be.
magic. I think he's the one working the magic, or
Why
it.
is
I
he so
suppose.
angry? And how is he preventing I kind of, the way I look at this, these candles are surrounding this guy.
Oh,
That
they've
could
kind
be
of
that they're just
caged this
floating
guy
around, but
in.
yeah, it looks like they've sort of caged
Oh.
him in. They're, they're blocking the damage that he's trying to deal.
Yes. Well, okay, so what if his face is being distorted by the magical field? Like, we aren't really seeing his features. We're seeing the spirit's view of it. His human features distorted by their magic.
Interesting.
Okay, Alan Polak, if you're listening, get in touch. We want to understand what's going on in Candles Glow. We're going to put 4 of them in. It's going to be great. It's going to work.
You'll love it. Okay. That was a good Candles Glow discussion. Let's go to Cleanfall. This is 2W for an arcane or sorcery arcane. I always want to say arcane sorcery.
It's much more natural, isn't it?
It is. And it says destroy all enchantments. So this is some big time enchantment hate in white, which, I think is the color where it belongs, but I don't think that this card belongs in the cube. I gave it a meh.
Yeah, I gave it an Instacut. This is like a double Instacut for me because A, I think it's terrible. But also B, I think it's kind of like miserable. Like if there is some enchantment deck, Hondens, lurking in the cube, like I don't want a card that dunks this hard on somebody. Like this just feels too brutal and too obnoxious.
Yeah. Great art though.
Oh, the art on this is amazing. It's like well, you describe it.
So we were sort of looking out on the plains, like the PLAINS of Kamigawa, and these spirit kind of worm, sea serpent, dragon looking things are hovering over it, and they've got these symbols kind of drifting and trailing down from them as they fly over the landscape, and you can see that in their wake, the land is turning golden yellow, and I guess they're sort of sweeping the land of all of these enchantments or all of this magic, however you want to conceive of it. But it's just really, really beautiful colors, really cool art.
It's amazing. It is kind of weird because I feel like destroy all enchantments to me feels hostile,
right?
More, and this is like a purification act. Well, and also the kami in this are supposed to be kind of, unfriendly. I don't know. It feels like not totally in sync, the art and the mechanic to me. I mean, I can see how it's a cleansing. It just, I guess I think of this as a more hostile cleansing than a friendly purple dragon worm cleansing.
Yeah, they do look very friendly.
They really do. They're almost huggable. Yeah, it's funny to me this is printed at uncommon. I mean, I guess you couldn't print it at higher rarity because boy, would that be miserable to open. But also, this must have clogged a lot of sealed and draft pools back in the day. I mean, I can't imagine this was playable. This is just terrible.
Yeah.
I always like to read the Gatherer comments for these old cards. It's one of the great things about old cards is there still were Gatherer comments before they locked them down. And somebody pointed out a cube combo with this. That's just great. So you run Enchanted Evening, which turns all permanents into enchantments. And you run Avacyn, Angel of Hope, which makes all your permanents indestructible. And then you Cleanfall and you wipe your opponent's board. So for just 16 mana and 3 cards, boom, that's it. You just totally dunk on your opponent.
OP.
So I really hope someone has done that at some point in history, because that would be pretty cool.
I wonder if whoever left that comment has ever pulled that off.
Yeah, this is also a funny example. Like, there's been this trend of green getting to do things white gets to do, but better and or cheaper. And this effect was later printed in green for 1G. So I feel kind of bad for white that its cool, weird card with the purple worms got just dunked on.
Well, that's kind of Kamigawa for you, though.
Yeah, sure. So do you have this as a meh? Do you really think this is a meh? I feel like this is just an Instacut.
No, I think it's an Instacut.
Okay. But maybe we print out the art and glue it to the box.
I suspect a lot of the mehs that I've given cards in this set are it just comes down to the art and me not wanting to say goodbye.
Let's talk about Devoted Retainer. 1W for a 1/1 human samurai. And he's got Bushido 1. So just a 1-mana 1/1 that gets bigger if he's blocked or becomes blocked. So I gave this guy a meh. I think he's fine. He's not terrible. I think the big problem this guy faces is like Yeah, he gets bigger if he gets blocked, but because he's a 1/1, like who cares? Your opponent's just going to not block him and take the damage until they have a creature that's bigger than him with Bushido, and then they'll let it die. I don't. He's pretty bad, honestly.
Yeah, he's not great. I feel like this also kind of highlights how a lot of the samurai, just kind of by nature of the way that Bushido works, are, I think, much stronger defensively than they are offensively.
Mm-hmm.
Devoted Retainer, when he's blocking, is always going to be at least a 2/2.
Mm-hmm.
Attacking, your opponent's pretty much always going to let him just stay at his vanilla power toughness. And, a 1-mana 1/1 is not great, but we're going to see some other samurai later on in white that are just, ridiculously underpowered for their mana cost. Mm-hmm. But they have Bushido that could bring them up to a power toughness that would make sense for what their cost had. But your opponent is never going to do that. That if you're just attacking, they're going to take the vanilla damage. They're not going to let you buff your guy by blocking him and, get in a trade that's not going to be favorable for them. I have Devoted Retainer as playable and having 4 copies of it, mostly for the reason that I feel like we need to try him out in there and to see, what our 1-drops look like, how many 1-drops we're going to need in this cube, given how slow Kamigawa is, but also how weak a lot of cards are. I feel like we may need some decent 1/1 representation, and this one's not great, but he does something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's. I think there's something to that. It's interesting. There's some good Reddit posts from people over the years who've built Kamigawa cubes, and one of them somewhere says, "This is going to sound strange, but you need to make sure that you don't let the aggro deck run away with things, even as bad as the aggro creatures are." And I believe what they meant by that is this format is so slow that just playing a thing on turn 1 is actually kind of impactful because there's not that many like decent 2 or 3 drop creatures or 1-drop. Like
right.
This is a super slow format, and so yeah, maybe there is a white weenie deck, and it doesn't care that Devoted Retainer is pretty bad. It reminds me of like when the original Sly deck came out. So Sly is the first aggro red deck in Magic's history. One of the first really aggressive decks that thinks about tempo and low mana curves in the history of the game. And one of the things about Sly, certainly to modernize, is all the cards are terrible, or all the creatures are terrible. Jackal Pups is the best of them, and that card by modern standards looks terrible. So much so that we were playing my cube with a friend who's newer to Magic, and he read the card and misread it, thinking it dealt the damage to your opponent instead of you, because it just seemed impossible to understand. But anyway, and yet Sly was a really good deck, and the reason it was good is just because playing your cards on curve and getting in below your opponent is inherently a powerful strategy. And so maybe Devoted Retainer, plus he is going to get upstaged pretty badly by Isamaru in a bit. But maybe, Devoted Retainer and some of these other white 1-drops, yeah, they're not amazing, but maybe he's okay. Okay enough.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he's going to start running away with games.
Yeah, doesn't this make you want to include Call to Glory just to cast our eyes back a little bit? You get your 3 Devoted Retainers out, you boost them, now they're 2/2s, maybe even 3/3s.
Yeah, didn't we?
We gave it a single. I'm just needling you on that.
Yeah, we're gonna put it in there.
I don't know if this is quite playable. To me, it's more of a meh, but we can call it playable if you want.
Let's call it playable for now.
Okay. Do you really think we need 3 of these? Or 4 of these? I feel like 3 is enough. But we
I guess three's probably enough. He's not that exciting.
Okay.
Let's go to a much more exciting card. 8.5 tails. WW for a legendary Fox Cleric. 2/2. He has 2 abilities. One says pay 1 colorless and 1 white mana. Target permanent you control gains protection from white until end of turn. And a second ability, pay 1 colorless mana. Target spell or permanent becomes white until end of turn. So just to kind of summarize all of that, basically 8.5 tails lets you spend 3 mana to protect any permanent you have from basically any spell by turning that spell white and then giving your permanent protection from white. This is a really cool card, probably one of the most iconic cards from Champions of Kamigawa, certainly one of the most iconic white cards. It's fairly popular in Commander, at least within Kamigawa commanders. To me, this is a really cool like way of combining two abilities that kind of do something separate on their own, and each one is not that special or not that interesting, but when put together, when combined, kind of allow you to do something that most white cards wouldn't allow you to do.
Yeah, I love this card. I love the art on this card a lot. I guess we can come back to that in a second. But yeah, I just think like as a 2-mana bear that can, mess with combat math, mess with your opponent's removal, let you chip in for damage. Like this thing does a lot of work. Like I think even if he had no abilities, I'd still be thinking about him just based on the decent-ish stats and really, really cool art. And really cool name, also 8.5 Tails. That is a really cool name. It just tells a story in itself. We don't know anything else about this guy, at least from the art. The flavor text is pretty meaningless. It just says, virtue is an inner light that can prevail in every soul, which is, nice, but doesn't say a whole lot. But just the name tells a story in itself, and the art. It's really an evocative, cool card.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting point of difference here is you have this as a single copy. I've been thinking about these legends, and I feel like some of them, this is really true of Isamaru, but also 8.5 Tails. I actually have him as 2x because I think he's just a really solid threat, and there might be room to sneak 2 of them in. I mean, the odds the same player drafts 2 and sees them both in a game, and that's a problem. I think you could probably sneak 2 in.
I guess I was just sort of thinking with all the legendary cards, it's legendary, just one copy in there. But yeah, I could see some of them working with multiple copies, and I think 8.5 Tails is probably one of the better ones to double down on.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's like a flavor thing there or something of like it's definitely weird to have multiple copies of a legendary creature.
But I mean, I don't think that's really too much of a problem. In a deck, you would certainly have multiple copies of some of your legends. I'm fine with having 2 of this guy in.
And you have him all the way up in auto include. I'm fine seeing he's in auto include, even if he goes down to 1 copy. I don't want a cube that has 0 copies of 8.5 Tails. This card is just too cool.
There you go.
I'm actually curious. Did you look at all at like what did commander decks with this card look like? I didn't look at that at all.
I didn't really. I saw that he was a popular commander.
Let me look here. Interesting. So yeah, some of the cards he shows up with are like COP white, so you can kind of do. It looks like a lot of them just take advantage of his second ability to make something white. So like COP white to protect you from white spells, or Glare of Heresy, which just says 2 exile a white permanent. Pentarch Paladin, which is a time spiral card that lets you choose a color when he comes into play and then destroy a permanent of that color. So it looks like it's kind of this cute deck that plays off of his ability to turn things white.
I like that.
Yeah.
Don't know how good it would be, but it's fun.
All right. Auto include 2x. All right, Ethereal Haze, single W for an instant arcane. Prevent all damage that would be dealt by creatures this turn. So it's your fog effect, but with arcane stapled onto it. I have this as a meh. That's probably generous. I think there's some weird pull in my heart towards white cards that slow the game down and break your opponent's spirit.
I'm seeing that.
Yeah, we're really going to see that with Ghostly Prison in a second here. But I don't know. I mean, we could put one of these in, but it's hard to care.
Yeah, I have no desire to put even one of these in. It's Arcane Fog,
and Fog is fine.
Yeah, Fog is fine, but there's more interesting ways for white to turtle.
That's true. That's true. If you're looking for white to turtle, this is a set where white really does it. With some pizzazz. All right, boom, Instacut. Let's move on.
Get out of here. Now, this is definitely not an Instacut. Ghostly Prison. 2W for an enchantment. It says, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature attacking you. I love this card. This is just, talk about white turtling. This is such a brutal and annoying card to play against. And is so fun to have, and so fun to frustrate your opponent with, or opponents with, if you're using it in Commander. It is a very popular Commander card, the number 3 card in the set, and it's not hard to see why.
Yeah, this must be one of the most reprinted cards out of the set too. It looks like it's been reprinted 13 times. Yeah, this card is just such a Commander staple, such an iconic card. to me. And also, even outside of Commander, I remember playing this in a lot of decks back in the day, just as a fledgling control player. And it really does work. Like it really slows down your kind of tempo-y aggro decks. It really, really annoys your opponent. It can really save you from, long enough to find a Wrath or find some other way to stabilize. Like this card does a lot of work.
It's like the value that you get out of this, just in terms of mana, I think is just insane. You're spending 3 mana to get it out there permanently, or at least until your opponent has some enchantment removal. And then within 2 attacks, your opponent is spending more mana just to keep doing what they want to be doing than you have spent on this spell. And it just sticks around. And they keep paying up.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that way. I mean, obviously you're going down a card in order to do it, but like, yeah, in terms of mana value, mana advantage, and really just forcing your opponent to make uncomfortable choices. Like if you're playing this card, I was going to say you're always the defensive player, but maybe you're not. Like even if you're not the defensive player, just your ability to force your opponent to make trade-off decisions every single turn, between spending their mana to advance their number of things on their board and spending their mana to like advance their ability to race. It's really brutal, especially in this set where things are quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Like your opponent isn't necessarily going to have a lot of spare mana hanging around for quite a while, because a lot of the most impactful cards are like 5 and 6 mana to get down.
Right.
I have a beef with this card, which is that I think the original art, I'll be honest, it isn't exceptional, but it is iconic in my view. But when they reprinted it into Commander for the first time, they gave it this art that's like a growling minotaur standing behind some white swords that I
hate that.
I hate that art, and it's become the iconic de facto art for this card, and that bums me out.
What's really frustrating is, a lot of the art in Kamigawa, even if the card were to be reprinted, the art would probably need to be changed just to make it less bizarre and
less Kamigawa. Yeah.
Honestly, like less, Japanese folklore-y. But Ghostly Prison is not one of those cards. Like this art could be printed in any set.
Yeah, the only thing
fit in just fine.
The only thing kind of Kamigawa about it is there's this kind of slight pagoda roof to the tower. But yeah, there's no reason this art had to change. And that new art is lame, and I hate it. And also, then it got another set of new art for, I think, Kaldheim Commander decks, which is also pretty meh. It's still not very... I can see why they don't think this art is amazing, but for such an iconic card, if they're not going to use the original art, then come up with some art that's like actually way better instead of okay.
Yeah, amen.
As far as how much to this to include, I think this is an auto include. I think on power level, this absolutely gets there. I think on being iconic, it absolutely gets there. I do think it could be a bit oppressive. Like this card is really kind of a beating to play against.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this as a single copy, just because I worry about, like, if a player gets 2 of these down, like, God help the aggro player. I think the game is over. And so for me, that makes it kind of a singleton, but I see you have it as a 2Xer.
Yeah, I guess the way I had been thinking of the, having multiple copies is to just sort of increase the chance that you'll come across one of them. But I think you're right that the, chances are only one player is going to want to go for Ghostly Prison. I guess if you were playing white, you'd probably want it no matter what.
I feel unless you're like in that aggro tempo deck, maybe then you don't put it in the main deck, but like any other deck, I mean, I feel like this card is so good, I would almost splash for it because it's only a single designated white.
Yeah.
So I feel like you can just sneak this into something else, and it's good enough that I would throw this into a deck that isn't even white.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm coming around to the idea of just having a single copy of it. I sort of like it being a card in there that you're fighting over and wondering who took it away from you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe dipping into white to play the Ghostly Prison that you wanted to get.
Right. You shouldn't be able to wheel Ghostly Prison. Like, if you want this card, you should spend a high pick on it because it is that good. This card is insane.
Yeah.
So, singleton auto include?
I like that. Yeah.
Speaking of, the fact that this was uncommon in the draft set, I don't know what that did to limited play, but can you imagine, like, if you did come up against the opponent who'd managed to grab 2 or 3 Ghostly Prisons and just stalls you forever and you just can't play Magic? All right, let's talk about a card that has less of a storied history. Harsh Deceiver. 3 and a W for a 1/4 creature spirit. So 4 mana, 1/4 spirit. 1, look at the top card of your library. 2, this is a separate ability. Reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, untap Harsh Deceiver, and it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. play this ability only once each turn. So it's a 4-mana 1/4 that for 1 can look at your top card, and for 2 can reveal your top card. And if it's a land, it gets marginally less horrifically bad.
And untaps.
And he untaps. All right, fine. I think this card is unbelievably bad. Like 4 mana for a 1/4 is not getting there on rate, even in this set. There's like a 4 mana 1/7 coming up. It's also not that good. And this ability is just like, it's an insult. Like paying 3 mana to make this into a 2/5 that kind of has vigilance, which is kind of what it should be off the, like without all the abilities.
Sometimes you get a 2/5 with kind of vigilance.
Yeah, exactly. Other times,
not every time.
Yeah, well, how many land do you have in your deck? 40% of the time, you get a 2/5 with vigilance. 60% of the time, you just wasted 3 mana and showed your opponent the top card of your library.
So I gave this a meh, but I've definitely come around to Instacut. Here's the reason I gave it a meh. Not because of Harsh Deceiver, but because there are 4 other Deceivers in this set, 1 in each color. This is a whole cycle of Deceivers, all of them with similar abilities. They all have the same ability of spending 1 mana to look at the top card of your library, and then a 2 mana ability that gives them some kind of buff when you reveal that, and it turns out to be a land. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that is strong or very good in any way,
or even particularly interesting, honestly,
or maybe even particularly interesting. But I do like the idea of these being bluffing cards. So maybe not Harsh Deceiver. Harsh Deceiver's not making it, but I feel like one of the other Deceivers should appear just a little bit, maybe just in a first iteration of the cube, just so we can see some of that bluffing in action, because it feels like it should be. It could be interesting, I guess.
Talk me through that. Why is there bluffing? Because you pay 2 mana. Doesn't your opponent just go, okay, I'll see what happens? Like, where does the bluffing moment come in there? Because you can't, it's not like you're going to do this and then they're going to decide to block and then they'll find out. Oh, I guess you could pay to look and then.
Exactly. So let's imagine a situation where
let's go. Well, I'm grabbing my whiteboard. All right.
Let me think about this. So your opponent has a 2/2 that they're ready to block your Harsh Deceiver with.
It's a big risk.
Reminder, he's a 1/4.
Yep.
You have already paid 1 mana to look at the top card of your library. So you know whether that's a land.
I think at that point you're already losing for having paid 1 mana to do nothing.
You know if it's a land. Your opponent, I don't think I need to remind you, your opponent does not know whether that's a land.
No.
You swing with your 1/4 Harsh Deceiver. Now your opponent is thinking about that top card on your library. He's thinking, if that's a land, and if my opponent pays 2 more mana, then my 2/2 is dust. It's going to be a blowout. This Harsh Deceiver is just going to stop him, and the Harsh Deceiver is going to untap.
Oh my god.
And he can get another +1/+1 next turn when he blocks my 3/3.
Yes. Wow.
By the way, he can only do the +1/+1.
Yeah, that's the kind of final just kick in the knees, isn't it? Just like, really? Like, if I put 3 mana into this, you're not going to just let... So, I mean, let's compare it. So it's kind of like a shade, right? So like the shades goes all the way back to alpha, this like, this long series of black cards that'll be like, pay a black mana to give something +1/+1. And you can do that any number of times. And so this card costs 2 to 3 mana, and you can only do it once. You're paying twice as much. And it's so viciously unfair.
Yeah, I will admit, Harsh Deceiver is just bad.
It's pretty bad.
I do want some Deceiver to appear in here.
Speaking of shades, there's a famous thing with the very first shade, Frozen Shade from Alpha. If you're not looking at it, go look up the art. It's got awesome art. Or if you're not familiar with the art, but it's also infamous for a problem, which is that you look at the art and it looks like that thing is flying because it's in midair, suspended. There's nothing around it. It's like clearly flying. And I feel like Harsh Deceiver has that same problem of this guy's definitely flying. Like he should have flying, but he doesn't. And that's a little additional niggling annoyance for me. Yeah. Okay. Is this an Instacut?
I'm willing to say goodbye to him.
One other thing I'll say is like, why is he harsh? Like, what's harsh about this guy?
I'd say +1/+1 and untapping is pretty harsh.
Yeah, it's the harsh. All my harshest teachers would untap themselves unexpectedly.
The art actually looks, for a Kami, he looks relatively welcoming with these smiling, smiling mask faces. I just noticed this sort of skeletal chicken claws at the bottom. So
yeah, Hmm.
Okay. Well, let's move on from him. Hikari, Twilight Guardian,
Yeah.
3 WW for a 4/4 legendary spirit with flying, who says whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, you may remove Hikari Twilight Guardian from the game. If you do, return it to play under its owner's control at end of turn. Basically, we've got a 5 mana 4/4 flyer who can flicker every time you play a spirit or arcane spell.
You had me at 5 mana 4/4 flyer.
I know, in this set, for sure, especially in white. I really, really love this card.
We're gonna talk about like 6 mana 2/1 flyer later.
Yeah, we're getting there. There's some good stuff coming up.
Some quality cards and content coming up.
Fasten your seatbelts.
This guy's amazing, I think. So like 5 mana 4/4 flyer is fine. I think even today that's fine. And then he has this ability that's, that's decent gravy, right? Your opponent targets it with a removal spell because it's literally the biggest creature on the board, barring the dragons. And you go, haha, I kept a copy of Candles Glow for just this moment. Candles Glow! And then you really get him. I think this guy's great.
That's a big turn.
It's a big turn.
I really love this card. I really, really love the art. This is one spirit in this set that looks like particularly threatening and godlike. He's looming over what I think is maybe a battlefield or something. Looks very, very powerful and just really awesome. I will say, though, there is not much in this set for this flicker effect to trigger. There's not very much synergy for Hikari to be kicking off when he comes back into the battlefield or when he leaves.
I think the synergy here is just save him from a removal spell, and that's like enough. Because I don't know if there's almost anything that's like whenever a spirit enters or something.
Yeah, I was just kind of like looking through the cards, at least in Champions. There's really very, very little enter the battlefield type effects.
Yeah, let me even see if there's anything there. If I did my Scryfall search right, there are 2 cards that could interact with that. There is Ronin War Club, which is an equipment from Betrayers that gives a creature +2/+1, and when a creature enters, you can attach the War Club to it, which doesn't really do much here because you're removing him from combat by definition from flickering him.
It'll be stronger next time.
And in the Web of War, which whenever a creature comes into play under your control, it gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn, which also I don't think could profitably interact with this. So yeah, this is just save Hikari from a removal spell, basically.
Yeah.
Which I think is good enough.
I think that's good enough with 5 mana 4/4.
Is this guy an auto-include? I had him as a playable, but I think he's just like, I struggle to see cutting this guy from the cube.
Yeah, he's making it in.
He's also going to end games, which I think is going to be a problem. So like he actually has enough power to like help close out a game.
Yeah, I guess that's something to keep in mind. But I mean, there has to be something in there that can end the game.
Let's move on to Hold the Line. 1 WW for an instant. Blocking creatures get +7/+7 until end of turn. So this is a callback to Righteousness from Alpha, which is for single W blocking. A single blocking creature gets +7/+7. This gives all blockers +7/+7. I don't know. This one is tough to evaluate. I feel like it's one of those kind of trap cards that looks really cool. Like your mind immediately starts spinning up scenarios of like, oh wow, imagine the blowouts I could have on my opponent. I could just wipe their entire board. But I just don't know if in practice it's really going to work out that way very often. I feel like this is going to get stuck in your hand, or your opponent's never going to make that alpha strike you hope, especially because it's pretty telegraphed, right? It's like 3 mana, 2 of which are designated. Like it's pretty. Well, if your opponent's ever seen this happen, I feel like they're going to know why you didn't attack with any creatures and why you're holding up 3 mana.
Right. I mean, do we want? I also rated this meh. I guess I don't really see the situation where you're all that happy having this. Like the blowout that you might set up just seems so unlikely to happen.
Yeah, sure does. I feel like I still want to throw in a single one just because it's a cool, flashy effect, although it ends up getting cut in the end. This has a mysteriously high rating on Gatherer, which I can only assume is just because it's really cool. On Gatherer, this is one of the highest rated white cards in the whole set.
Wow.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it good.
Nope. Yeah, I guess that seems fine to have one copy in there.
Like this is rated 1 point higher than Hikari Twilight Guardian for as a random example.
That's hurtful.
I guess it's a meh. I don't know. I feel like I'm just super meh on whether to even call this a meh.
I think that means we just put them in there, put one copy in there,
test it out,
see what happens.
All right. I feel like we're alternating where I get the cards that are hateful and you get the cool ones. You want to take us on to a cool?
I set it up this way.
Yeah, well played.
Let's go to Honden of Cleansing Fire. 3W for a legendary enchantment, Shrine. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 2 life for each shrine you control. So there's a couple, interesting different things happening with this card. First is that it's a legendary enchantment, and this card and the other 4 Honden in this set were, I believe, the very first legendary enchantments in Magic. There were world enchantments that existed way back when, but these are the first legendary enchantments. And it also has a subtype of Shrine. So the way that these Honden work is, obviously you can only have 1 copy of each Honden in play because they're legendary. But if you're able to get multiple Honden out there in multiple colors, they all build off of each other, and they all have an effect that gets stronger based on how many Honden you have in play. So in this case, Honden of Cleansing Fire gets you, 2 life every turn for every shrine that you control.
Yeah, and actually now I'm wondering, is this the first subtype for enchantments in the game? And I think it is, because of course auras weren't a subtype until a set or 2 later. Yeah, I love the Hondens. They're just such a fun cycle. They, like, particularly as a newish player when the set came out, like, they just call out to you to, like, build a deck around me. Like, you don't have to be told
exactly
why or what should go in it. You're just like, oh yeah, I put a bunch of Hondens in there, and some things that help me play Hondens faster. That's awesome.
I also like how these here legendary is definitely used as a drawback. Having that legendary tag is nerfing this card by keeping you from having more than 1 Honden of the same type out on the battlefield, which kind of forces you to consider how you're going to build this multicolored deck that gets as many shrines out there as you can, but doesn't just let you spam the same one and get this crazy effect.
Yeah.
And there's, given that legendary was such a key mechanic, a key idea in Kamigawa, it's interesting seeing how it's used basically as a way of weakening a lot of cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I feel like I'm willing to warp the cube almost as much as it takes in order to include the Hondens, just because they are probably some of my favorite cards from the entire block. I just really, really love these cards and have a huge fondness for them. And I think they're cool. I think they create a kind of fun, unique mini game during the draft. And if this is the only Honden you get, it's not unbelievably bad. It's not great, but like gaining 2 life a turn is tolerable.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, especially, if we have that turtley white deck.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to be pretty happy to be gaining 2 life every turn. And I think with how slow most Kamigawa decks are likely to be, getting that for 4 mana doesn't seem terrible.
No, it doesn't seem totally awful. So obviously I think we rate this a build around, and in some quantity, I feel like we're going to have to see where the cube size ends up to know how many, but I think it's probably around 2 to 3x. Like, I don't think it should be super easy to pick up Hondens, but I think more than 1 of each is probably necessary.
Yeah. How many do you think we should start with in testing?
Let me look at some of the other quantities we've had so far. I'm remembering that we gave Candle's Glow a 4x, which seems increasingly unearned.
Is that our only 4x?
That's our only 4x so far. Is the iconic Candle's Glow. Yeah, that I feel like I pulled the wool over your eyes for that one. I feel like we should start with 2 of each, and like if it's not enough to make the Honden deck work, we need to add. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about Horizon Seed. Horizon Seed is 4 and a W for a 2/1 spirit. Yes, you heard that right. 5 mana for a 2/1. Whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, regenerate target creature. Wow, this card is so bad. I've somehow never seen this card in like 20 years of living with Kamigawa. I kind of see why, because like this card has no reason to show up in a deck or an article or any content ever, because this card is just terrible. Like, it's a pretty decent effect, regenerating a creature, but the fact that it triggers off spirits or arcane is like, well, it doesn't really trigger off spirits because that's going to be sorcery speed, and you don't need to regenerate at sorcery speed almost ever. So like this card's just really bad.
It is so terrible. And I love that it's an uncommon also.
Yeah.
You get this 2/1 for 5, and that's uncommon. And just, as you're pointing out, such not only is it not a very exciting or good ability, but it's so hard to imagine the situation where this pans out.
Yeah, 2/1 is just such a like that's the real kicker here. Cause like you can imagine, I don't know, if this was like a 1/5 or something. So you're just like, this is a big defensive wall that makes everything else more defensive. Yeah, then it's okay-ish. Or like the flip side, if this was maybe like a 5/1 and you can like chip in and threaten huge damage with it, like something to make it provide some additional value on its own. But like 2/1 is just that can't do anything. Like it's not going to have any impact on the game.
Nope, not a bit.
I did really love this art, like having seen it for the first time here. It's really kind of spooky and strange. It's got this kind of like iridescent look to the creature in the foreground, and then the background look almost looks like a Japanese woodcut or something. Like there's a really kind of strange stylistic contrast between the character and the background that appeals to me. Like I really like this art.
Yeah, it's a pity it's on discard.
I know that's a common trend throughout the set, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the art here is by Matt Cavada, who's an artist who for a while became Magic's, I think, art director before leaving the company, and you could see why he made that case for himself with pieces like this. This is a very strong, unique piece.
Yeah,
Instacut though.
Up the cards and Instacut.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another questionable spirit. We've got Hundred-Talon Kami. It's a 4W spirit, 2/3. With flying and soul shift 4. And this is our first soul shift card, which is exciting. So let's read out what that does. When this is put into a graveyard from play, you may return target spirit card with converted mana cost 4 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Basically, what this mechanic does, it only appears on spirits, and it lets you get a spirit of 1 less mana cost back from your graveyard when this spirit dies. I really don't know how to feel about this card. Just the fact that it's something with more than 1 power and it flies feels like it's okay.
You're already excited.
In Kamigawa?
Yeah.
And that you can soul shift and get something back when you lose this guy. Maybe he's not that bad. I gave him a meh, but I don't know. I'm warming up to him.
Yeah, I think he's somewhere between meh and playable. Like I think a 5 mana 2/3 flyer. I mean, it's not amazing, but like until recently, you would always hear that like what is the card that was originally printed as this? Like a 5 mana 3/3 flyer vanilla is kind of a base rate that's tolerable in a draft deck. You'd hear that a lot on limited resources or something. This guy's a little worse. He's 2/3, so that's that matters. And it's not like 5 mana 3/3 is amazing, but it's fine. But like Soul Shift 4 is decent. That's some decent value to pull you in. And I think like Kamigawa limited games are about grinding out value, and so I think this guy's pretty decent.
Yeah. Should we put him in?
Yeah, I think we put him in at like a 2x. Like I think this is kind of a glue card that makes the Soul Shift deck work. Nobody's excited about it, but he's fine. I do think you're right that it's a meh though. I feel like giving this guy a playable is just an insult to playables.
It's a little too much.
Like Ghostly. This guy we can't rate this guy playable and have Ghostly Prison as playable.
No. When you put it that way. This is the art on this card is definitely like peak Kamigawa. It's so hard to describe what this creature looks like. It's this purple bag of flesh looking thing with a tiny little humanoid face on it, and then all of these talons and claws coming out of it in a pretty like horrifying arrangement. I mean, it really looks like this would be like a black demon type creature in another set if you change the background a little bit.
Oh, you know what I just realized? If you zoom way in on the art, like on Scryfall, there's 2 faces that like kind of that kind of like fabric thing has another face on top of it. So he's got like a male face that's old on the top, and then a kind of younger female face on the bottom.
Wow.
It's freaky. I just sent you a close up of the art. We're gonna need a live reaction here on mic.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I've been looking at this card for years and I never noticed that.
Yeah, I can see all the veins on the central pus bag too.
Oh god.
That's probably the only time
I
I'll
hope we
say that
never
on
need to
this
say that phrase
podcast.
again during the podcast. Oof. Yeah, I like this. I think this art is decent. It's not one of my top Kamigawa Spirit art cards because while it is freaky, I think the best of them to me are like so strange that they're kind of they're like almost like conceptual art or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think this one quite rises to that level for me. Like it's very solid, but it's not like I don't know. Lantern Kami to me is the gold standard of like truly freaky Kamigawa art that just looks otherworldly and utterly alien.
Yeah, agreed.
But still, I think this guy gets a solid meh.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Hundred-Talon Kami. All right, let's talk about Indomitable Will. Indomitable Will is 1 and a W for a enchant creature or an aura. And you may play Indomitable Will anytime you can play an instant. So we now call that flash. So it's 1 and a W for a flash aura. And it says enchanted creature gets +1/+2. Pretty straightforward. It's basically Holy Strength for 1 more mana with flash. That's not getting like my pulse racing. I'm not like incredibly excited about this card. But it's not totally embarrassing. It's like a really mediocre pump spell that can win a combat. I think this card's fine.
Yeah, I think this is in limited Kamigawa. I think this is actually pretty strong. I think getting a permanent buff that's a little bit more than just +1/+1 is actually pretty much unique in white champions cards. I'm not seeing any other.
I think you're pretty
white
much
cards
right,
here
yeah.
that
let me go look.
Can just absolutely give you this kind of buff. There's a couple cards that buff based on creature type and whatnot. I feel like this is about as good as it gets as far as like making your creatures a little more tough and sturdy in this limited setting where a lot of creatures are just really terrible. And frankly, I think where in a set like this where there are so many low power, low toughness creatures, there are not that many like big bombs that are coming in with that much power and toughness. Having a little bit of an edge, just +1/+2 is enough to put you over the top against your opponent's also weak creature, if that makes sense.
It does, because what it's making me think is like the traditional trade-off with an aura, right, is that you're opening yourself up to a 2-for-1. You've invested 2 cards, they get killed by 1 card. But I think what you're saying is like it's more like a 1-for-1 because you win a combat, kill their creature, and then this sticks around. And so you've actually gained just a hair's breadth of advantage there, and pulled ahead on cards.
Right, and you choose the terms of it. You're not putting Indomitable Will out there and just kind of waiting for that creature to die to removal, without having gotten any benefit out of this aura. You set the terms and you say like, I know that I will be getting value out of this card by putting it on a blocker or putting it on my attacker and tricking my opponent a little bit.
I think I'd be persuaded by that. The other thing that I'm liking about this card is that it's kind of a unique effect. Like, as you were saying, there's not that many auras in the set. Many of them are terrible. This one is fine. Like, I think, that in itself has some value just as a unique effect that's nice to represent the block and to increase the variety of cards accessible in the cube.
Yeah.
I'm willing to go meh on this. I'm reluctant to go all the way to playable with you.
Okay, I guess we can settle on meh.
But I like your idea of having 2 of it. I think that's a decent place to start, although we might need to cut it in the end.
All right.
And I'm fact checking you as I go through here. Yeah, I don't really see any other card in the set except for a Serpent Skin, which is kind of like a green version of this that's slightly better, maybe. There's only 2 auras in the set, or in the entire block, that boost power and toughness without a huge drawback.
There you go. Okay, let's go to Innocence Kami. Oh boy. 3 WW for a 2/3 spirit with this ability. Pay white mana and tap Innocence Kami to tap target creature. And whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, untap Innocence Kami. So this is, I guess, a creature that lets you do some kind of soft control of your opponent by tapping down their creatures and then theoretically playing your spirits and arcane spells to untap Innocence Kami and then pay another white mana and tap another creature down, just sort of keep your opponent locked down like that. But it's just so much mana for so little creature.
Yeah, it really is. It's pretty brutal because this is, this is one of the iconic white effects. Like I'm kind of doing a lazy Scryfall search, and there's like eyeballing it 50 plus white cards that do some variant of this.
Wow.
And some of them are really good. Like, Amonkhet has Fan Bearer, single W, 1/2, and you can pay 2 and tap to tap target creature. Or more recently, Giant Killer from Throne of Eldraine, another 1 mana thing that can tap down a creature. There's a bunch of things that do this throughout Magic's history. But almost all of them share one thing in common, which is that they're like 1 or 2 mana, maybe 3. Like 5 mana is kind of late in the game to be doing something like this, because the earliest you're going to be able to activate the ability is turn 6, and more realistically like turn 7 or 8 as you wait to get up to 5 mana. Like this thing is not happening anytime soon in the game, and I just think that's too late to have an impact most of the time.
Yeah. The second ability also, when you play Spirit or Arcane Spell, untap it, just feels almost totally irrelevant, because not only are you spending the 1 mana to tap a creature, you're also spending the cost of whatever Spirit or Arcane Spell you're playing to get that tap value. Obviously, you're probably not playing the Spirit or Arcane Spell just to use Innocence Kami again. But that ability feels almost irrelevant.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is you're just not you're not tacking on that much extra value onto it, right? Like You're tapping 2 things, and that's pretty nice, I guess, but it's not amazing. Although I don't know, maybe if you're doing it in, we did commit ourselves to having 4 candles glows in the cube. Like maybe this does something with that. Like you're just kind of really just hard locking your opponent out of the game with that. No, I don't think so.
But even there, think about Innocence Kami with Candle's Glow. What Candle's Glow is doing is preventing combat damage.
Yeah, right. It's too late.
Healing you instead. So Innocence Kami is stopping the combat damage before it starts.
Yeah.
So the timing there is not ideal.
Yeah, we're going to compare this in a little bit against Kabuto Moth. And just, anyway, all that to say, I think this might actually just be an insta-cut. I think this card is just really bad.
Yeah, cut it.
All right, goodbye. All right, finally, my streak of talking about the less exciting cards is coming to an end, because we have Isamaru, Hound of Konda. 1 white mana for a legendary creature Hound. 2/2. That's it. There's no rules text. So it's a single mana for a 2/2 Hound that's legendary. That might not sound like much by today's standards, but when this came out, this made a huge splash. This card was iconic. This card was written about everywhere. This card had like a spoiler article that treated this as a giant reveal. There had never ever been a card like this in the history of Magic. Just a straight 1 mana 2/2, no downside. Just get in there and beat them up. This card was a game changer that really presaged a shift in the power of 1-drops over the next decade or 2.
Mm-hmm. Also, a surprisingly popular commander.
Yeah. There's not a huge number of decks, but there's enough, and I just love that people are like motivated to try to make this guy work in Commander. That's great.
Yeah, definite auto include in our cube.
Yeah, just to reiterate why, it's like he's strong power. It's an iconic card from the set. It's influenced Magic design ever since. It's got awesome art. Like the fearsomeness on this Hound is really fun to look at. Really nice line work, really bright popping colors. Like it's just everything about this card is great.
Mm-hmm. Well, why do you say it influenced the design of Magic?
Well, so before this, there was in Alpha, there is Savannah Lion. So 1 white mana for 2/1 with no downside. Then Red gets a series of not a lot, but a handful of single red 2 power creatures that are either conditional, like Curd Ape, or are come with drawbacks, like Jackal Pups. But White kind of gets left out of the party all the way until Isamaru. And there was no card in Magic with this stat line, like the 2/2 bear stat line for 1 mana with no downside until Isamaru. That just literally didn't exist for the first, 15 years of Magic's life, or 11 years of Magic's life, I guess it was. And then since then, I think R&D has kind of slowly and then recently pretty dramatically opened the taps in terms of what 1-drop creatures can do. Like you can see that elsewhere in the set, right? Like the other 1-drops in the set are like a 1/1 flyer, a 1/1 with Bushido 1, a 0/1 with a marginal ability. Like they're not good cards, but this guy is a beating. Like a 2/2 is a serious body that can like threaten to trade up with a bigger creature. get in for damage. And I think this showed that like that wasn't too dangerous. Like R&D could actually do that and not break the game.
Yeah. He could lose to a harsh Deceiver, though.
That's right. Yeah. That's, but not necessarily. I think that shows how good this is, right? Like, there's no guarantee that a 4 or 5 mana creature could take this down. It trades with Horizon Seed.
Oh, man.
Actually, you know what? A 1/1 trades with Horizon Seed. That's a bad example. Almost every card in this, every creature in the history of Magic trades with Horizon Seed. One interesting question with Isamaru, I think, is how many to include. So I went nuts here and said 4x. I think that's wrong just because the power's too high maybe, and it just feels weird. But like from a deck construction perspective, I don't think that's crazy. Like you look right now, you know, we're in the age of Ragavan right now in Modern, which is a red 2-drop or a red 1-drop that's probably the most powerful 1-drop printed in the history of Magic by a significant stretch. And even though he's legendary, he's played it in 4 copies because he's just that good. And I think Isamaru, like if you could get 4 of these in your draft deck, I'd put them all in. Like that wouldn't be a problem.
Mm-hmm. But do we want that situation where you could have 4 of them? I don't think so.
But I don't think we just want one either, right? Like if we want that white weenie deck to exist, like this is the gold standard, right? This is like what makes that deck tick is Isamaru, I suspect.
Right. I feel like maybe we start with 3 of them, not quite 4, but 3 of them, and see if that gets too wild.
3, yeah, I'm fine with 3 or even 2. Like we could tune it up if needed, like make people work for it. Yeah, I definitely think 4 is wrong, but I also think more than 1. It's also kind of an interesting little like skill testing decision point for a drafter, like thinking about can I include multiples of these?
Yeah,
I don't know, 2 or 3. I'll put this one on you.
Let's start with 3.
All right. Yeah, that gives me more chances to look at Isamaru, which I'm totally happy with.
Next one's not quite as exciting, but still a bit of a house in his own way. This is Kabuto Moth. 2W for a 1/2 spirit with flying, and the ability tap, target creature gets +1/+2 until end of turn. I'm actually going to pass the torch back to you on this one, because I think you have a lot more to say about Kabuto Moth than I do.
Yeah, and I have to confess it's secondhand, so I haven't really played with this card much except in casual play a long time ago. But when I watch Chaos Draft streams, people speak of Kabuto Moth with a certain degree of reverence. And similarly, when people talk about Kamigawa Block Limited, they also talk about Kabuto Moth with some reverence. And I think the reason is this guy just messes up combat badly. We talked about being somewhat excited about Indomitable Will. Well, Indomitable Will goes on 1 creature. It's stuck to that creature forever, and it comes with the risk of a 2-for-1. Kabuto Moth sits on the battlefield threatening an Indomitable Will at any time for 0 mana, which means that your opponent's blocking decisions and attacking decisions just become a nightmare because they have to make their decisions, and then you get to tilt the board in whatever way is most advantageous for you. And so, like, every one of your creatures is now a better rate than their creatures. So if you just take, to take a simple example, you have 3 bears, they have 3 bears. They can't swing in because you're just going to be able to set up your blocks such that you're going to win and indeed blow your opponent out. And similarly, the other way around. This is just a really solid card. And when it's just on its own, it blocks as a 2/4 flyer, which for 3 mana in Kamigawa is like already fine. Like this card is really strong, I think.
Is it too strong for our cube?
I don't think so. I haven't played with it, as I said, directly, outside of really casual play. And so I'm not sure, but
so we need to try.
My instincts tell me it's good and it's not GT, right? Like this isn't like game-breakingly powerful, but I do think it's good. I think it's a reason to be in white for drafters.
Yeah. Why don't we go with 2 copies of that then?
2 copies? All right, I can live with 2 copies. I also want to just say this card has like, I guess what I'll call stress equity for your opponent. Like it just puts your opponent in such an uncomfortable position where like none of their decisions look good. Like they just have to sweat every combat, and you just get to sit back there stroking your moth and just knowing that you're gonna clean up. Also, it's got great art. I love Kabuto Moth. Thank you, Kabuto Moth. Okay, great. Let's talk about Kami of Ancient Law. Kami of Ancient Law is 1 and a W for a 2/2 spirit, and you can sack it to destroy an enchantment. So 2/2 spirit that can kill itself to kill an enchantment. This guy's fine, right? It's a bear. Bears are fine. The weenie deck wants some bears. It's got an ability that might be somewhat relevant against Hondens. It's part of the spirit tribe, so you can spirit craft it back. This card's fine. let's include it. I think it's like a playable, and we should have two-ish.
Yeah, I agree. I've always liked this card mostly for the art. It's just a super bizarre Kami.
It's kind of horrifying.
It kind of is, and I feel like it captures the weirdness of this whole block really perfectly. Where you've got these bizarre creatures that barely even look like a creature that you would, recognize from Magic the Gathering. It doesn't look like what you would imagine as a spirit before Kamigawa. It doesn't look like a beast. It doesn't look like a human. It's just this weird, like half fleshy.
Let's try to describe it. Yeah. So like, okay, so it's like a kind of serpenty thing. So its tail starts with like a claw-like hand, and then we transition into kind of like a gray snake-like body
with tassels,
with like a tasseled robe, and then we go to like kind of a pink sort of body horror skeletal figure
hand
that is wearing from what I think is a judge's wig because it's a Kami of Law. And then it's like either spitting out or ingesting like stone tablets of law from out of its body. I mean, this is really strange.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's standing next to a scales. Wow, they really hit the law thing pretty hard here, didn't they?
They wanted you to know what this guy's deal was. And it's destroying enchantments.
Yeah, I don't feel like any of that connects to enchantments. Like it's the ancient law that. Well, I guess we are finding out the spirits of Kamigawa hate enchantments because
they do hate enchantments.
Kami of ancient law and the one thing with the purple worms,
Cleanfall, yeah,
Cleanfall.
They want to get rid of the enchantments. The ancient laws say that they must.
Okay, but wait, will you pause on that because the iconic enchantments from the set are the Hondens, which are shrines to the Kami. Some of which actually make spirits. Hold on a second. Something doesn't add up.
This is getting very complicated. But I do like this guy.
Yeah, this guy's fine.
I feel like, we should have something in the cube that can deal with enchantments. And I feel like this is the right kind of something. He's still a bear, with or without an enchantment being on the battlefield. And it gives you the option of dealing with one.
Yeah, I actually feel like he's basically, like nowadays we talk about hate bears, like these low mana value, disruptive white creatures, and he's kind of like a mediocre early hate bear.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's playable, and I think we should have two of them to start.
Let's do it.
He's kind of a glue card. Like I feel like we dial up the amount of Kami, dial up or down the amount of Kami of Ancient Law, depending on, how many 2-drops we need.
Yeah, and I think at this point no, I guess we have multiple enchantments at this point, so could be relevant.
Yeah.
All right, our next card is Kami of Old Stone, 3W for a 1/7 spirit, and that's it. I have almost nothing to say about this guy. He's just a big butt Kami with 1 power, who's going to do a whole lot of blocking, maybe.
Yeah, he's just going to stand there and block. But he doesn't have defender. He can go attack,
He could.
If needed, with 1 power, admittedly. He's just going to get blocked, probably by like a Kami of Ancient Law. But, it's an option.
Yeah, I just, there's nothing here to really get excited. Even the art, he just kind of looks like a stone golem.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
It's true. Like the art, I feel like they could have done more to make him wacky. It's fine. It's not a bad piece of art. There's some pretty nice, like, work with the setting sun in the background or the rising sun in the background. Some good light work here, but
yeah,
I tried to write a comment about this guy for like 3 minutes, and I was just like, I really don't have anything to say. He just exists.
He's just there.
I had him as a meh just because my feelings were so like medium that I couldn't bring myself to like hate him or love him. But I feel like he's just an insta-cut because like I don't know who's going to be excited about this in a draft opening a pack. Yeah. Like nobody.
See, I sort of feel like if my feelings for a card basically don't exist, then I feel like it's an insta-cut for me.
Yeah, just because part of the goal is to evoke emotions and remind you of the block and so on, and this just doesn't evoke anything.
Right. He's just there.
All right. Goodbye, Kami of Old Stone. Back to the memory hole. Let's talk about Kami of the Painted Road, which, if nothing else, the art here is going to create some reactions. So Kami of the Painted Road is 4 and a W for a 3/3 spirit. Whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, Kami of the Painted Road gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. This I actually felt kind of like Kami of Old Stone about this. The art is really freaky, so we can talk about that. But the actual effect here is like, I don't know, just kind of meh. Like, the thing I was noticing going through this set is like that White's toolbox feels very limited at this stage in Magic's history. Like we're after the era when White gets to do really naughty things like Balance and Armageddon, right? We're well past that. We're past the early era of good removal in Swords to Plowshares, and we're before they invented like Oblivion Ring style removal and the idea that White can remove anything temporarily. And so like White basically has like life gain and damage prevention and protection. Like it doesn't have that much to do, and I feel like this card kind of shows that. Like it's just not. Protection is a decently powerful ability, but just this card is like, bleh.
Yeah, and so few of these abilities, give White any meaningful way to just get rid of a threat or to get something out of the way so that you can actually get in and finish the game.
Yeah, it's really hard to advance the board state. Like you can stall, but it's hard to like really meaningfully break parity.
And this actually reminds me of Horizon Seed that we were talking about a few minutes ago, which had this similar, when you play a spirit or arcane spell, do this effect. And in Horizon Seed's case, that was regenerate target creature. In this case, it's this gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. These are both creating a situation where you only get that benefit in a reactive stance.
Well, I think protection's a little bit better, right? Because it also gets you unblockable from that color. But the problem is your opponent's likely in 2 colors, and it can only benefit itself too. If this was like target spirit, it would be a little better. But it's just him, and he's a turd. So who cares? I don't care about protecting you, Kami of the Painted Road.
Right. This 3/3.
Yeah, just this 3/3.
No other ability.
Yeah, I just really feel like it's an awkward moment for White. Like we hadn't thought of. R&D hadn't developed like token making and hate bears and aura and equipment synergies and like all these other like White still gets hate for being boring, but it has a lot more tools in its toolbox. But at this point, there's just not much for it to do.
Right. Just gotta wait and count on candles glow.
Yeah, exactly. This has got to meet the same Instacut bar as Kami of Old Stone, right? It just doesn't do anything.
So. Yeah. Gone. Okay, another Kami as we keep going through the Ks. Kami of the Palace Fields. 5W for a 3/2 spirit with flying and first strike and soul shift 5. I really struggled with rating this one. Like 6 mana for 3 power is pretty rough, even when it has flying. And this has first strike also, but that's not changing the amount of damage that you're dealing to your opponent, which is probably what you're hoping to do with having a flyer. You compare this to Hikari Twilight Guardian from earlier, where you've got a 5 mana 4/4 flyer, and here a 6 mana 3/2 flyer. This feels pretty bad. It does have Soul Shift, and with Soul Shift 5 could actually get back quite a few different things for you, I suppose. But this is just, so much mana for what feels like a card that's not going to have that much impact. It sets up a clock on your opponent, I suppose, but a clock that starts on turn 6.
Yeah, I think one problem we're going to run into with spirits now I think about it, particularly in White maybe, is we have these soul shift cards, but the spirits are worse than the humans. I think because they have soul shift, right? The like grinded out ability of them means R&D's maybe a little bit scared of them. But what that means is like they're all kind of collectively bad. And I do wonder when we get to the end of this, are we going to find like we almost have to go back and include some of these mediocre spirits in order to make a soul shift deck work? Or do we commit that deck to only certain colors rather than all 5? Like just looking back, we've gone through about half the spirits in White already. And, we've cut a lot of them because they're not that good.
Yeah, it at least so far, I really feel like Soul Shift is not working in white. Like I was trying to think of spirits that I would want to get back with Kami of the Palace Fields, and Hikari is the only one that I can think of.
Yeah, I think the thing with Soul Shift though is like that ability to recur and recur and recur and grind down that mana curve is pretty powerful, right? Like that is going to make it like once you start eking out that degree of value, I think it does become pretty hard for your opponent to outvalue you in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But the cost is that the cards themselves are not very good. But
Right.
maybe it means, for example, Kami of the Painted Road is like a little better than it looks. I still don't want that guy in the cube though. But I feel like Kami of the Palace Fields might do enough. Like it's a flyer. It's really overcosted, but like maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I think maybe it has a place, and the art is pretty enough and cool enough that I wouldn't mind, seeing this card a little bit, even if it ends up being pretty bad.
Yeah, the art here I think is awesome. It's another Matt Cavada piece. He did the unfortunately not very iconic. I've already blanked on its name. What was it?
It was Horizon Seed, right?
Horizon Seed. Thank you. He did Horizon Seed, which also has stellar art. But this one is much more kind of like storybook to me. It's this woman. Again, it's like impossible to describe Kamigawa spirit art. But it's this kind of like feminine figure wearing a traditional like kind of one of those rice farmer hats, and she's got this super long black hair that eventually kind of transitions into being her feet in this way that's very whimsical and kind of playful and silly. And yeah, I adore this art. I think it's super fun.
Yeah, it's also kind of a lot more recognizable as something Japanese inspired than I think most of the Kami art is. There's some images and motifs here that I think would be recognizable as Japanese to most Magic players, whereas something like Kami of the Painted Road, which I don't think we actually ever described the art of that card.
How could one? Go, you can try.
I mean, it's hard. Let's rewind a little bit and talk about what Kami of the Painted Road looks like. So what we have here is a human hand, a left hand to be specific, that's a disembodied hand scuttling its way down a path. And out of the back of that hand, so opposite the palm, are two stony protrusions, pillars. And between them, at the top, is an eyeball. Just an eyeball hanging out between these two pillars. And then there's also some magical stuff and some floating things happening in front of it. A lot of floaty stuff behind it, just completely bizarre. And just a super weird looking card. And this is a piece by Ron Spencer. So, like very well-known Magic artist. Tons of iconic pieces. So, this isn't like they just brought in some random artist and said, make something super weird. Like this is Ron Spencer creating this super weird, kind of cool looking, but very, very bizarre spirit. Kami of the Palace Fields, by contrast, is, one of the few cards that I think would be like instantly recognizable as something Japanese inspired.
Yeah, it's a good point because like one of the points Mark Rosewater often makes about Kamigawa is that it disappointed a lot of players and sold poorly because they didn't recognize it as being Japanese enough. And, according to Magic's designers, I don't know enough about Magic's folklore to verify this. I've sometimes wondered if this is a bit exaggerated by Magic designers. But according to them, it's a very faithful kind of interpretation of like Japanese folklore. And that they went really deep into the culture and really tried to draw out like interesting kind of obscure things that would feel very evocative. But that it wasn't what players were expecting, which is like ninja, samurai, pop culture characters. And like, I think you're right that this card, like, it's still whimsical. It's still very fairy. It's still weird, but it's also recognizably Japanese enough that you look at it and go, oh yeah, that's a kind of Japanese spirit creature versus Kami the Painted Road is just like, what am I looking at here? This is bizarre. Or even, and I don't think that is a very strong piece, to be honest, but even like Kami of Ancient Law, Kabuto Moth, like these pieces are great. And like, you'd really struggle, I think, to like connect them to what most people think of as like Japanese, like pop culture for sure.
Right.
Where do you come down on Kami of the Palace Fields?
I feel like this is it. I feel like this is a meh for me almost entirely because it has flying.
Yeah. Definitely, if it didn't have flying, I don't think we'd be talking about this.
Just anything in white that gives you the ability to sort of punch through and close out a game. I think I feel like we can't just immediately cut, but I suspect that this won't make it through every round of revisions in the future.
Yeah, I feel like this is a one of meh to start.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Kitsune Blademaster. So Kitsune Blademaster is 2 and a W for a 2/2 Fox Samurai, which is an extremely cool type line. And he has First Strike and Bushido 1. So 3 mana 2/2 with First Strike and Bushido 1. I think this card will do just fine. It's not mind-blowing, but it's a Gray Ogre with, 2 very relevant abilities. It's going to win a lot of combats. It's going to support the Samurai theme. I have it as a playable 2 of.
Yeah, totally agree. I thought it was playable, maybe even 3 of. I think this may be one of the better Samurai in the set, actually, because it has First Strike.
I don't know if I'm willing to go that far, because, at the end of the day, it's only punching through for 2 damage if your opponent decides to ignore it. But I don't know about one of the best Samurai in the set.
I mean, what are we really comparing him with, though? We've got the Retainer from earlier.
Konda's Hatamoto, I think, is pretty decent.
Okay.
Actually, let's even see how many other 3-drop Samurais there are in the set. I suspect it's not many.
That's a good question.
There are 8 in total. No others in white except Opalai Konda's Yojimbo from Betrayers, which has Defender. So yeah, he's not facing a lot of competition in the 3-drop Samurai slot.
So he's definitely one of the better 3-drop.
He's definitely
one of the better white 3-drop Samurai.
He's the best aggressive white 3-drop Samurai in the set.
I think we can agree on that.
Red has some decent ones, but yeah, white. Okay, yeah, I think he might be a 3 of. You've convinced me.
Yeah, we may end up having too many of them, seeing him too often, but it's a card where I wouldn't be sad in Kamigawa to be playing this on turn 3.
Playable 3 of.
All right, playable 3 of. Okay, let's talk about another Kitsune, Kitsune Diviner, 1 white mana for a 0/1 Fox Cleric, and you can tap to tap target spirit. Only a spirit. This card was also a struggle for me. I really like the idea of having this in like a white, human anti-spirit type deck where you're just, you're using this to lock down your spirit opponent. But it's a 0/1. It's so weak. It has no real impact on the board unless and until your opponent has a spirit out. So it's hard for me to see this really having any kind of impact.
Yeah, it has literally the lowest impact on the board as a body that a Magic card can have.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actual effect, I don't know. If we compare it to our earlier 5 mana tap a thing down, like this is the price you want to pay for one of these, right? You want to get it down early so you can mess up your opponent and kind of grind, keep their best threats tapped down, make it hard for them to attack in, make it a little hard for them to block. And I also I think the weenie deck that we're talking about, I think its competition is largely coming from spirit decks, right? Like the mortals tend to go lower to the ground, the spirits tend to go higher up, and so in mana value. And so I think the fact that she targets only spirits may not be that big of a downside, because it's really all the expensive cards are largely spirits. So if this is tapping down your opponent's 4 mana 2/4 that's supposed to hold the fort, maybe that's all you need her to do.
I think that we should try her out, but I do kind of suspect that most of the time, she's going to be sitting there just kind of irrelevant and end up being just a chump block later on in the game.
Yeah, I could see it going either way. I could see her being irrelevant, or I could see her actually presenting a little too much of a... Because I feel like the expensive... We talked about this a little earlier. The expensive decks may already struggle to stabilize, and this might actually mean maybe it even makes it a little... doesn't do anything in a lot of matchups, but against the spirit deck actually makes it a little too hard for them to stabilize.
Yeah.
I feel like we start with 2 of these in the cube.
That makes sense.
I had it as a playable. I'm more attracted to your meh. I don't think this is anything exceptional for sure.
Yeah.
2 times meh. Let's talk about Kitsune Healer. 3 and a W for a 2/2. Fox Cleric. Tap, prevent the next 1 damage, so it will be dealt to target creature or player this turn. Tap, prevent all damage, so it would be dealt to target legendary creature this turn. This is, I guess, a build around. I found this guy kind of hard to evaluate. It's a cool effect. The first effect is annoying, and it can kind of like Kabuto Moth, make combat really annoying for your opponent, although this does suffer pretty badly in comparison with Kabuto Moth. The second ability is fun, though, and it does make me want to build around it, although I just feel like 4 mana for utility creature is awkward. You don't really want your kind of tap down every turn utility creatures to cost 4 mana. I don't know. I found this one really hard to evaluate.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I said playable maybe as my rating. Preventing all damage to one of your legendary creatures sounds really great, but like you're saying, 4 mana to have this guy just kind of stick around and be tapping every turn to protect your legendary, it seems like a big investment, and kind of a really awkward way to be spending your turn 4. That's the comparison with Kabuto Moth is interesting, because here, the Kitsune Healer does allow you to kind of mess around with combat and make your opponent's life a little bit harder in terms of figuring out trades and getting combat to go their way. But unlike Kabuto Moth, Kitsune Healer is not allowing you to change the board state all that much. Like Kabuto Moth gives you the +1 power that could let you get rid of a threat that you otherwise wouldn't be able to, that lets you
and it gives you +2 toughness, which does more to protect your creature than this does.
Right. So it Kabuto Moth is letting you absorb an attack and maybe also trade with a creature that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, or to get rid of a creature you wouldn't otherwise be able to. Kitsune Healer is just kind of
and kill your opponent faster, potentially.
Right. This guy's just kind of maybe hopefully saving one of your creatures.
Yeah, I feel like the more we talk about him, the more I feel like this is kind of an insta. So this gets
the closer he gets to insta-cut.
Yeah, because I feel like we're not building a set cube, right? Like a set cube where you're trying to simulate a retail draft environment, and every card makes the cut in a set ratio would include this card. But I think we're not doing that, right? We're crafting a more curated cube experience. And if you want this effect, Kabuto Moth is right there. Or there's these various spirits that do weird, funky things with spirit and arcane triggers that also, I just don't think this has a place in the cube against other cards that do somewhat similar things in ways that are either better or more interesting.
Right. Yeah, I feel like we should just cut him.
All right, let's just cut him.
Yeah.
Gone.
Okay, our next Kitsune is Kitsune Mystic, and this is another flip card, so exciting times. The top half of Kitsune Mystic says it's a 3W for a Fox Wizard, 2/3. At end of turn, if Kitsune Mystic is enchanted by 2 or more enchantments, flip it. The other side is Autumn-Tail Kitsune Sage, who is a 4/5 Fox Wizard, a legendary Fox Wizard, I should say. And he has this ability: pay 1 mana, move target enchantment, enchanting a creature to another creature. So nowadays that would, say move target aura from one creature to another creature. Reading this card, I was just thinking, what is the goal here? Eventually you get a 4 mana 4/5 that has this ability that is almost totally irrelevant and that you would really need to work hard to get any kind of value out of. How often do you need to move an enchantment?
Well, it's not in your control either, because the best use is stealing your opponent's auras.
Right.
And if your opponent knows how to play Magic well, they may not even be playing. It's just, I just don't see how to make this card work.
The best case scenario is stealing your opponent's auras, putting them on your own creature, but you have to have enough auras of your own to flip Kitsune Mystic. So it's the top half of this is setting you up. It's making you think of a situation where you've got a whole bunch of auras on your creatures, and you get 2 of them on Kitsune Mystic, and then you're flipping them over, and then you're shuffling all your auras around however you want. And what does that do for you? Presumably you're going to play the aura on the creature that you want it on to begin with.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's kind of remarkable about this is in modern Magic, you could just give someone the back half of this creature for the front half mana cost, and it would still be like unplayable because it would be a 4 mana 4/5 with an ability that will almost never trigger. Like this card just doesn't. I don't know. Like even in that era, it's really hard to see how this card makes sense. Like I think this is one area where the really small text box got to him because the flip effect, moving enchantments is kind of cool, but it's not cool enough. Like if you had that and another ability that was like, I don't know, Autumn-Tail gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, and you can pay 1 to yoink enchant auras. That would be kind of cool, right? You'd be moving and grooving, and it'd be a pretty cool effect. Right. But like, just this is not. It's just not. It's not even cool, let alone playable.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I don't know that any of the flip cards have, sort of more than one ability per side. They're just sort of, the top
there's
half.
No room. There's not.
Yeah,
the
top half just has something that says flip it over, and then the bottom half has one usually pretty unremarkable ability because you only have 3 lines there. Like there's no space to put more on there that could make it more punchy or more impactful. I feel like these flip cards they seem like they should have more impact on the game because they are a flip card, but they really don't.
Right, because they're asking you to put some work into them to usually because you start with a below rate creature, right? Like this is 4 mana for a 2/3. Even in
a 2/3 with no ability.
Even in Champions of Kamigawa, that's not a good card. Bushi Tenderfoot is 1 white mana for a 1/1. Like these are below rate, but at least Bushi Tenderfoot flips into a card that's like, it's not OP, but it's really cool, right? It's a 3/4 double striking Bushido 2 Samurai. That's cool. Like this thing flips into just an effect that it's hard to know if you could play like 10 pickup games of Magic with people at your local game store and never and flip this in every game and never need to use the ability.
Yeah, I think that this kind of highlights another problem with implementing flip cards in this way, where as opposed to having a double-sided card where you've got a full text box and full art, all of that, with the way that these flip cards are implemented, I feel like there's a bit of a conceptual issue also where you look at this card and it feels like you're getting 2 cards for 1, right? It looks like there are 2 cards here and you're getting the value of both of those on a single card, kind of like a split card where you've got 2 spells printed on the same card, and it feels like there's sort of double value that
like you could make a choice or something,
right like you have a choice, or there's some extra utility being added on here because there are sort of 2 cards printed onto the single piece of paper. But that's really not the case with these flip cards at all. You've got what it really is a very weak creature that needs to have a very specific condition met to become usually another not very good creature.
Yeah, no, it's a pity because there is there's obviously a great idea in the kernel of this, right? Like this becomes transform cards, and I'm actually not personally a huge fan of transform cards, but clearly I'm in the minority. Like those are some of the most popular things Magic's come up with. They show up in like every second set, it seems like nowadays. They're like a really popular idea that's really works for a lot of people. And I like the way that these are telling stories. Like they're, all of these kind of start as non-legendaries early in their careers, essentially mortals who grow into legendaries who presumably have a big role in the war or something like that's cool. It's just a pity that the actual mechanics just can't quite meet it. I hope we have at least 1 or 2 of these that are playable because it is Kamigawa, whether it's good or not. But I don't think this one is making the grade.
Nope.
All right, Insta Cut.
This is a rare, by the way.
This is a rare, and my condolences to those of you who opened this card. All right, let's talk about Kitsune Riftwalker. 1 WW for a 2/1 Fox Wizard, cool type line. Protection from spirits and from arcane. So it's a 2/1 Fox Wizard that has pro spirit, pro arcane. This thing's like fine-ish. I think the fact that it's double designated is pretty brutal. Like double designated for a 2/1, even if it has some pretty relevant protection abilities, is not great. It's hard to get excited about, but it might be fine.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the 3 mana, 2 of them designated for something with 1 toughness is just really hard for me to get behind as anything more than a meh. Well, you noted in one of your comments that it's a 3 mana 2 power unblockable creature, which seems fine. But I think realistically, he's not even going to be that. Like I don't think we're going to have that many decks coming out of this cube that are, purely spirit
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
purely human world. It's going to be a mix, right? You're going to have spirits probably filling out the top end of the deck, mana cost wise. Your mortals at the lower end. So, and given that it's probably more mortals at the lower end, Kitsune Riftwalker is not going to be unblockable early on in the game. And by the time your opponent has, a 5, 6, 7 mana spirit out there, admittedly, it's probably a 7 mana 3/3. But by the time they have that out there, Kitsune Riftwalker is going to be irrelevant.
Yeah, he'll be outclassed by, and the fact that he's just got a single point of toughness is just rough.
Yeah, that's pretty tough.
Bushi Tenderfoot gets to tangle with this guy. Alas, doesn't get to win, but does get, well, unless he has an Indomitable Will on him. Anyway, yeah, I think we both had this at MEB, but I kind of feel like, to the same point, I feel like we're being tough on these poor Kitsune, but to the same point as Kitsune Healer, like, just kind of why include this? Like, it's not an iconic card. It's not a super interesting effect.
We're talking ourselves into having this in when it's not a very good card. Neither of us really likes it that much, and it's not iconic. So,
and I don't think it's needed to fill a spot on a. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Right.
Goodbye.
All right.
Goodbye to Kitsune Riftwalker. All right. Let's just scrolling back. So the Kitsune really have to build their hopes around Kitsune Diviner here because it's the only one that got more than an Instacut out of us.
That's painful. I mean, there are some other great foxes we're going to be talking about. 8.5 Tails is Kitsune also. He doesn't have it in his name, but he is a fox.
Okay. All right. That's cool. So we'll make sure to, I think we need to make sure to sneak at least one fox type blind creature into the cube.
Yeah,
they are definitely part of Kamigawa.
Okay, so our next card is a pretty iconic one. We've got Konda, Lord of Eiganjo. 5 WW for a 3/3 legendary human samurai with vigilance, Bushido 5, and indestructible. So I think that this is actually our very first vigilance card of the set, and kind of a good time to talk about how that was made a keyword in this set. But I just want to say about Konda that I remember being so excited when I was many years ago when I pulled this card from a booster pack. I was so excited when I got him. I had actually read one of the Kamigawa novels before I got this card, and it just felt like so awesome to have this card that was an embodiment of a character who is basically the book's sort of quasi-villain, this figure who has kind of betrayed humanity in pursuit of power and has angered the kami, angered the gods.
Yeah, one of the first white villains, I think, in Magic's history.
Yeah, and there was actually a conscious story decision was made to have the villain of this block be a white card, Konda, and the hero of this block, Toshiro Umizawa, be a black card. Unfortunately, we're not going to see him until Betrayers. But yeah, this is a pretty iconic card.
Yeah, and I think I was just double checking this. I think also the first non-artifact creature to have indestructible. There's also Myojin cycle in the set, which we'll get to in a minute, who have indestructible. But I think he's the first kind of human mortal creature to have indestructible, which made him feel super cool when he released. It just the Bushido 5 and the indestructible new keyword, just super splashy card back in the day.
Yeah, that's interesting. So on that new keyword note, vigilance, which is of course a very common kind of staple keyword in the game now, which just means attacking doesn't cause the creature to tap. Before this set, before Champions of Kamigawa, this was not a keyworded ability. This was something that was written out as rules text on any card that had it. And it was officially made a keyword in Champions of Kamigawa, and Konda is the first card that we're seeing that has vigilance. And Bushido 5, of course. That's a lot of Bushido.
That is so much Bushido. This must be the most Bushido any card's ever had.
I think that is the most Bushido. There may be another samurai we see later that has some flexible Bushido that could theoretically get higher, but 5 is definitely the highest printed Bushido we're going to see.
Yeah, I also love the art, like the contrast here. He's this, super old dude. He looks like 90 years old, and yet he's super badass. I believe canonically the reason he's badass is that he stole. So the reason the spirits and the mortals have gone to war is that Konda stole basically the spirit world baby, which is called It That Was Taken, which is a pretty on the nose name, but I like it. And I'm not quite clear. Did he steal it to become immortal? I think that's why he's indestructible and super badass, but I'm not totally clear on that part. So if yeah,
I would need to reread the novels to be sure about this. I need to do a lore check. But I think that he stole it to become immortal, but there was also something in there about him protecting his kingdom, and he's sort of this deranged, tragic figure who had the best interests of his kingdom at heart when he stole it, but then this power has kind of made him lose it, and also given him indestructibility.
Black or red or something. Yeah, he still believes he's doing the right thing.
Yes. So very, very flavorful card. I really, appreciate cards like this that, tie the mechanics in with the story, whether or not you know the story. Like, you can tell from the mechanics here that they're that this is supposed to be, a really iconic and powerful figure in this world.
Yeah, one of those rare cards where the actual rules text here is incredibly simple, right? He's just got 3 keywords: vigilance, Bushido 5, indestructible. But he feels powerful and splashy and unique just from that combination of the abilities and the type line, or the stat line and the casting cost.
Right. So I think
now
we probably disagree about how powerful he actually is.
Yeah.
So I gave Konda an auto include. Wow. Because I feel like he's so, I'm not going to argue that he's a great card by any stretch of the modern imagination. But at least to me, he's just so iconic and such a, feels like a card that any white samurai deck should have and try to find some way to get to, that I just want him to be in there.
I'm fine including him. I have him as a meh. I really look just at playability there, and I think even by Kamigawa standards, like 7 mana 3/3. So I think the main problem with Konda is that he is a 3/3 at the end of the day. Like, Bushido 5 is enormous; it beats everything. The problem is he does attack as a 3/3, and so your opponent can pretty plausibly just ignore him on offense for quite a while. Now, I guess he does hold down the fort fairly well on defense, minus the lack of reach, and I think inarguably the best big creatures in the set are the dragons that we'll be getting to the first of soon. And he looks, he doesn't stack up quite so well against the dragons. I'm fine throwing one of them in there just because he's cool. But I think on playability, I don't know how much he's going to do for us.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to shine, but I do want him in there. It is a bit sad that all the dragons, it's not sad for the dragons that they all have flying, but it's sad for Konda that he can't fight them.
It would be a sad dragon if they didn't have flying.
Yeah. This really, I think, highlights one of the problems with having Bushido as like a central mechanic in white. It's really hard to make a powerful card with Bushido as a central mechanic, because if its stats are anything close to, if its baseline stats are anything close to where they should be for the mana cost, which of course with Konda they're not.
With Kamigawa they're not really.
With Kamigawa they're not. If the stats are close to the mana cost, to where they should be with the mana cost, then you really can't have a very big Bushido number. And if you don't have a very big Bushido number, at least in this era of Magic, you can't have a very big number. And if you don't have a very big Bushido number, then it's sort of like, what's the point of having it on there at all?
Yeah, and I think it's particularly challenging. I think this is a little less true in Kamigawa, but in general, right? Like white, the role of white creatures is largely to get in and aggro your opponent. The classic cube mono white archetype is mono white aggro. It's little cheap dudes getting in there, chipping in for damage early. And, the fact that many of the otherwise weenie creatures in this have Bushido means they don't fill that role quite as well.
He's no Isamaru.
Yeah, this guy's definitely no Isamaru. His dog outshines him in my view.
Oh no.
I know. Well, isn't that true of a lot of us though? I'm fine calling him an auto include single. I don't know if he'll make it all the way to the end of the coals, but I'm fine starting him in there.
All right.
I'm also going to try to capture from now on. There are so many legends in Kamigawa, and I'm curious to see how many EDH decks each of them helm on each EDH rec. So Konda heads up 47 EDH Rex, which is a small number, but still more than I expected. Because apart from being the iconic samurai leader, it's kind of hard to see what would pull you into building a deck around him.
Yeah, that's an expensive commander for one that does this.
Yeah, 7-mana commander that just comes in as a 3/3 with no abilities is tough. So shout out to those 47 lovers of Konda. All right, let's talk about one of Konda's buddies, Konda's Hatamoto. 1W for a 1/2 human samurai with Bushido 1. And as long as you control a legendary samurai, Konda's Hatamoto gets +1/+2 and has vigilance. So a 1/2 with Bushido that becomes a 2/4 with Bushido and vigilance for 2. I think this guy is totally playable. He's not getting any pulses racing, but his stat line for Kamigawa is totally adequate. He attacks kind of okay. He blocks pretty decent for a 2-drop. And I like the way he pulls you on a little journey to try to build around him. Obviously, Konda jumps out at you here, but there's other, we'll just call them more affordable white samurai we've already talked about, legendary white samurai we've already talked about, like 8.5 Tails. And I like how he sends you on a little quest to try to pair him up. Oh, wait, 8.5 Tails isn't a samurai. No. Uh-oh. How many legendary samurai are there?
No, we do have a couple more. There's a total of 5 white legendary samurai.
Okay.
If you include Bushi Tenderfoot's flip as one.
I'm not going to allow. Oh, but Sensei Golden-Tail is a legendary samurai, and we love him.
Yeah.
We liked. Yeah. Okay.
We have.
We can make this
Konda's
work.
General coming up.
We have Kentaro in the next set. We got all the red legend. We can make this work.
Yeah. I definitely want him in. He's at least a build around, if not playable.
Yeah, I have him as just a playable and like maybe starting him on 3. I feel like he's just a 3 quantity. I think he's just a nice glue card for the white decks.
Yeah, let's do it.
Boom.
All right, our next card, going back to some spirit action here, is Lantern Kami. 1 white mana for a 1/1 spirit with flying. That's it. This is one of the strangest pieces of art in this set, which is full of very, very strange art.
Oh, it's so good. It might be my favorite Kami art, or even my favorite art from the block. I love this art.
Wow, that's so interesting. Can you try to describe it?
Oh no, that's putting me on the spot. Okay, so I'll start by saying it's by John Avon, who's one of the all-time great Magic artists. He's largely known for lands because he has a really nice, pretty photorealistic style with just enough painterliness to it that it doesn't just look like a render or something. So this art, it's like we're up in the sky and there's sort of a purple yellow sunset or something in the background, and then our creature in the foreground is sort of this purple, fleshy, spiky kind of, I don't know, almost like a flower or a coral or something with all these yellow lanterns around it. I'm not doing it justice. Just look it up. It's very abstract, very otherworldly. It looks like something. It's kind of like something from a horror story or something. It's very creepy. It's leaning heavy on creepy, which is nice and unusual in a white card. Without being like, it's not like going all the way to body horror or something. It's just very otherworldly.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that this is one of your favorite pieces of art in the set, because I feel like looking at this, there's almost no familiar form for my mind to kind of grab onto.
Yeah, he's wrecking your mind. Exactly.
He is. So I don't dislike this art, and I don't really find it disgusting or disturbing or anything, but I just other than the skill of John Avon, I just don't know what to like or dislike about it. It's so abstract.
Yeah, it doesn't have like a strong focal point exactly, or it doesn't kind of pull you in or tell a story. But just from a technical level, I appreciate it. I appreciate how unusual it is for a white card, and I appreciate how it kind of like a couple other cards we already talked about, like the hand with the arch on its back. What was that called? Kami of the Painted Road. Some of these just go super hard in this very strange, very abstract, very kind of spirit world aesthetic dimension, and I like that.
Yeah.
I guess we should talk about whether it's playable too. I think it's meh, but I think you think a little more highly of Lantern Kami.
Yeah, I mean, I rated this playable because I feel like it's one of the few cards, at least in Champions, that does fit into that kind of white weenie archetype that we were just discussing.
Mm-hmm.
And a 1/1 for 1 is nothing amazing, but the flying means you're at least going to get in for some chip damage, or you can block, for example, an opponent's dragon in one attack. Just chump block it. It's not that it's some great or incredible card, but it's
sorry, that second use case. I'm not.
we were just
me.
talking about Konda can't do it, so I'm just trying to compare to Konda.
But I want my cards to win, Connor.
I want them to win too, but you're not going to find that in this set.
Somebody's got to win.
This is as good as it gets.
Yeah. I think it's not quite as good as it looks, just because the difference between 1 power and 2 power on a weenie creature is so huge. It's the difference between a 20-turn clock and a 10-turn clock, which might sound kind of like, super obvious, but I do think the impact on the game of these kind of Suntail Hawk, although we call them Suntail Hawks, they should be called Lantern Kamis in my view. Anyway, the impact on the game of these kind of 1/1 flyers is just generally pretty weak. But I think we start him out, and if he doesn't perform, we cull. I don't know why I'm calling it he. It's definitely an it. We cull it.
Give it a chance.
All right, we'll give it a chance. I don't know if I'm with. Maybe we do need to go high on multiples.
I don't know. 4 just feels like too many. I said 4 copies, but it just feels like.
Does the Spiritcraft deck care about this, or is the board impact just too small? I think you're looking to Spiritcraft into something a little better than a Lantern Kami.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about soul shifting and having this be the only spirit in your graveyard and being pretty sad.
Yeah, the other funny thing about this is I feel like this actually isn't for the Spirit deck. This is really for the white weenie deck that largely is Samurai.
Kind of belongs more with the Samurai.
Yeah, he's a traitor. It's a traitor. I keep calling it he.
Yeah,
why do you keep
calling him a he? I just said calling him a he. Why do you call it a he?
I've invested myself so much into Lantern Kami over the last 18 years of my life. I can't separate my identity from that of the Lantern Kami. I see myself in it.
It's a little worrying.
I don't know, 3 of them?
Yeah, let's do 3.
Just because who wants to look at 4 of them, Me. All right, let's talk about Masako the Humorless. Masako is 2 and a W for a 2/1 human advisor, legendary. You may play her anytime you could play an instant, and tapped creatures you control may block as though they were untapped. So 3 mana, 2/1 flash that lets your tapped creatures block. This is a hard one to evaluate. I believe this effect is literally unique in the history of Magic. It's kind of fun as like a surprise potential. It's strange to have both this and Call to Glory in the same set because they both fill the same kind of aha, gotcha kind of role. It's just the stat line, even by Kamigawa standards, is just so bad. Like her whole thing is to enable a surprise block and reversal, but she doesn't have any toughness to back it up with. Like if she was a 2/2 or a 1/3 or something, I feel like she'd be a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, it's just an effect like this, like tapped creatures you control may block as though they were untapped. That's something that you want on a creature or on a card that is going to stick around for a little bit and let you get some value out of it. And a 2/1 is not going to stick around for a little bit.
Yeah, because she also can't crash back in on offense because she'll trade with a freaking Lantern Kami. It's just hard to see. And then as a trick, the trick is kind of, at that point, I think I'd rather have Call to Glory as bad as it is, because at least that can potentially boost some of my creatures and let me win combats I don't have business winning.
Yeah, this is essentially just a 3 mana, creature, target creature you control that is tapped can block as though it wasn't.
Well, it's all your creatures.
It's all your creatures, but I don't know. It's hard to see that really working.
Yeah, it's another example where I think we talked about this earlier. It feels like White's design space at this era of Magic is just so circumscribed. Like they haven't come up with Oblivion Ring and all these other things that define White in the more recent era of Magic, and they've gotten rid of all the feel bads. And so like you're just left with 2 cards in this set that let creatures that couldn't normally block, for example. And that's just not, it's not doing it.
Yeah, it's just a lot of kind of sad combat tricks.
What do you think about the art here?
I really dislike this art.
Really?
So it's showing Masako, who I guess is like an advisor to Konda. And she is looking straight at the viewer against a symmetrical background. Her costume is almost completely symmetrical. The way that this painting is framed is almost totally symmetrical, and I'm really not a fan of that.
Doesn't that amplify her humorlessness, though?
I suppose that she's just like so straight edge that everything needs to be exactly in its place. I mean, I guess I can kind of appreciate that kind of call to the humorlessness, but I don't like the look of this card.
Huh. I kind of appreciate it because I like her wry grin contrasted with her humorlessness. You know, I'm also noticing she has some extremely intense collarbone going on here. I mean, she's got some tendons. It's impressive.
Strong neck.
She's like an F1 driver or something. Like her neck is powerful. Also, I saw you mention in the comments, and I noticed this too. Her clothing doesn't look Japanese to me at all. I mean, I don't know much about historical Japanese clothing, but it doesn't. This looks like a Regency era English costume or something.
Right? Like it just does not. I mean, you know, maybe the headpiece kind of thing that she's wearing is vaguely, you know, kind of mythical Japanese looking, but the clothes are just seem totally out of place.
I think I'm realizing why her neck's so strong. Look at that headpiece. Must really
That's gotta weigh a lot.
Can you imagine balancing that all day? No wonder she's humorless.
Yeah.
Wow. So I think we both have this as kind of a meh singleton. I guess she can make it in. I just I don't know.
I don't even.
And she's not even a samurai. I know she should be an advisor flavor wise, but she would play so much better if she was a samurai.
Yeah, maybe a human samurai advisor. But that kind of like 3-part creature type, I think it's
new.
Yeah, it's like I don't think that even existed at this time. The idea that you could have a human advisor samurai, it was just sort of a race class idea of human class advisor.
Yeah, this was before the modern era where we started making like elf jellyfish clerics or whatever we have now.
I'm fine with just cutting Masako.
Let's just cut her. I don't want to pain you aesthetically in this. That one thing with this is we don't need to have any room in a Kamigawa cube for art that isn't 10 out of 10 banging great, because almost every
that
piece
is very true. There is plenty of amazing art in this set. We don't need to be looking at ones we don't like.
All right. See you, Masako. Oh, wait. I forgot to say her EDH rec count. 54 decks are headed by Masako. The same, nearly the same. No, more than Konda, which also was baffling to me. I guess at least she's cheap. You know, she's got that going over Konda. Like in EDH, like Konda's never doing anything. At least she can come into play and then do very low. The terrible thing there is, though, she doesn't have, you lose the surprise factor because she's just in your command zone. So I guess she's kind of a threat. I don't know.
I guess, yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Just stall out the game.
All right.
Okay. Actually, I have one more thing to say about Masako. As much as I dislike this card, I can't seem to stop talking about her. One of the, very unusual things about Kamigawa is that all of the rare creatures in this set, all of them are legendary. And Masako, which is cool. It's sort of flavor and theme wise. And that was one of the central themes of Kamigawa during design was legends. Like, we are going to have a lot of legendary creatures in this set. And, one of the ways it was conceived of to do that was to have every single rare creature be a legend. But that means that some of those legendary creatures just have to be bad. Not every rare creature can be amazing or even good. Some of them have to be bad, and Masako, I think, is one of those. Okay, now I'm done. Let's move on to Mothrider Samurai. This is 3 white for a 2/2 human samurai with flying and Bushido 1. Yep. Nothing amazing here, but I feel like the flying plus a Bushido is like just barely enough for Mothrider Samurai to at least make a first cut.
I agree. Now, I want to quibble with the idea there's nothing amazing, because I think riding a moth is pretty cool.
I mean, that is pretty dope.
Like, not only is it a cool concept, but I think it's really well realized in the art. Like, he just looks incredibly cool. His moth is somehow kind of cuddly. It's almost got like an owl face on it and little horns.
Yeah.
So it's a cute moth. And then you got this guy and there's a moon behind him. So it's got this almost 70s sci-fi look with all the purple and...
Yeah, it's a very, very kind of monochrome.
It's like riding over the moon or something.
I think that's another lore thing, like the plains surrounding Eiganjo, which is like the castle that Konda is the shogun of. I think like those plains have all been devastated by the war or something, so he's like riding over these ruined plains surrounding Eiganjo.
Oh, that's why there's all these craters. Okay, all right, it's coming together.
We're slowly piecing together the story of this block.
I'm happy to report there's actually 2 other Mothriders. There's one in Saviors, and then the new Neon Dynasty Kamigawa set also has a Mothrider, so that makes me happy.
Oh, wow, I love that.
Yeah, isn't that great?
That's awesome. They're still riding them.
Yeah, I think this thing's like meh. It's like you throw a couple in, you're not super thrilled to have it, but it'll fill a spot in the curve.
Yeah, and give us another samurai.
Yeah, meh.
All right.
Yeah, and I think 2 of them just
I think so.
Feels like 2. Great. Let's talk about Myojin of Cleansing Fire. 5 W. That's 8 mana. For a 4/6 legendary spirit. Myojin of Cleansing Fire comes into play with a divinity counter on it if you played it from your hand. It's indestructible as long as it has a divinity counter on it. And you can remove the divinity counter to destroy each other creature. So 8 mana, 4/6, indestructibility, and if you get rid of the indestructibility, you kill every other creature. I vacillated on this a long time. These are super cool, super iconic cards. I also think they're really probably very bad. 8 mana is a lot, even in Kamigawa Limited. Like the color requirement here is intensive. You need 3 pips of white. 8 mana is really high. Like that's turn 11, probably turn 12. Like there's no ramp in white. There's basically no ramp in the whole set, with just a handful of exceptions. I don't know. I just don't think this gets there.
But that art.
The art is dope. Connor, you talk about the art while I prepare more arguments about why it still isn't good.
It is so cool. So this is a Kev Walker piece. Kev Walker has done a lot of amazing dragon art in Magic and just a lot of great art in Magic generally. But what he's painted here is this sort of humanoid figure wearing these flowing white robes with what look like 6 katanas coming out from behind him, arrayed in this sort of star pattern. And then behind that is this giant kind of fan with more blades sticking out of it. This is also a very symmetrical piece of art, a little bit like Masako the Humorless, but this one is actually good. And there's just enough kind of asymmetry with these 5 sort of floating, flaming orbs or skulls around him. I can't quite tell what they are. Mm-hmm. And just a really, really cool and really powerful looking spirit. And the Myojin, again, there's one in each color in this set, are sort of the closest thing that we see to a god, I guess. So they're supposed to be more powerful than pretty much any other spirit in this set, thematically or like flavor wise, which is why they have this indestructible or this divinity counter on them. So he is supposed to be, different from the rest of the Kami, not just a regular spirit.
Yeah, and it looks like Kev Walker did the art for all 5 of these, and I would say I'm not too in love with Myojin of Lifesweb, the green one, but all the others just have spectacular art, like technically accomplished, interesting figures, just really compelling pieces.
Yep.
That said, I still don't think this card is good enough. I don't think it's castable. I think the fact that it only gets the divinity counter if you played it from your hand is pretty rough. Like I think the effect here is honestly medium enough that even if you allowed people to cheat it into play, it wouldn't be overpowered. It would just be decent. So yeah, I think I will say this is probably the best or second best of the Myojin. Like I think it's downhill largely from here, but I still don't think it's very good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I probably have too much of a soft spot for this card, but the ability is just so cool, and of course an iconic ability in white, the board wipe. I rated this auto include, but I'm
Well, let me build it back up because I do think there's two things that maybe I'm wrong on here. So one is the interaction with Spiritcraft is pretty decent because it's at that point it becomes fairly asymmetrical wiping the board because you have
You mean Soul
all
Shift?
these spirits, Soul Shift, sorry, that are going to trigger when you remove the counter. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. If you have a white spirit deck, but I feel like the drawback with that is, a lot of the good white cards are samurai,
Right.
and I don't think there's very many good white spirits, at least in this set. Maybe later in the block we'll run into a few, but are there really that many white spirits you want to bring back after the Myojin has wiped the board? And also like
Yeah, it looks like there's only 5 soul shifting white cards in the block.
That's pretty rough.
That's rough.
And with this mana commitment for Myojin, you're gonna have a bit of a tough time, having that many non-white creatures and still getting the Myojin out. And the 4/6 stat line is also a problem, both because that's not very big for 8 mana, but after you've wiped the board with the Myojin, that's not very much damage to be swinging in with. Your opponent is probably going to have several turns to try to rebuild after this wipe, and the Myojin is not going to get that much damage in there in the meantime.
It does look like it should fly.
It seems like they should all fly, right?
Yeah, they all are fly. I mean, it should fly in the sense that it's literally flying in the art.
Yeah, up in the clouds.
Yeah. It looks like we're getting a new cycle of Myojin in the Commander set that accompanies the new Kamigawa set, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And one interesting little design thing is, so these get divinity counters, and then have an additional ability that gives them indestructible when they have a divinity counter. And the new Myojin use the ability counter technology that they've developed since the set was released to just get indestructible counters, which is a nice little bit of simplifying. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I like that. On that note, Kamigawa was only the second block to have indestructibility in it. The first one, of course, was Mirrodin with the Darksteel cards, which had indestructible. But the thinking in design and development back then was still that indestructible was a dangerous ability and possibly too strong. So in order to make cards like the Myojin not be broken, which I think they definitely are not now,
no,
the indestructibility was, given to them as a temporary thing that they would have to give up for their full.
Yeah, I mean, if you picture this like 8 mana 4/6, indestructible, and it comes into play with the Wrath of God counter that you remove once, and then it's left as a 4/6 indestructible. I think by modern Magic standards, that still seems really cute and harmless.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sad.
I know, it's power creep.
What are we gonna do with this guy?
I think we throw him in. So we already cut one forgettable white legend, right? We cut Masako.
Yep.
So I think we let actually appropriate for the story. We let Konda and the Myojin kind of battle it out to see which one of them, which one of these overcosted white legendaries should make it into the
weak
final
white
one.
Legendaries. I like it.
Yeah. Meh.
Okay.
Wait. Oh, I forgot the critical how many EDH Recs question.
This is important.
There is one deck on EDH Rec headed by the Myojin of Cleansing Fire.
One hero.
Just one, one brave soul.
Boy, I'm trying to imagine what else would be in that. We should do a separate episode just about that deck.
Deck tech?
Yeah, we should try it out and see how
it's probably like a shopping list or something.
Oh. The Myojin. Well, let's go back to the human world with yet another legend. This is Nagao, Bound by Honor. 3W for a 3/3 legendary human samurai, who's uncommon, by the way. He has Bushido 1, and whenever he attacks, samurai you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. I think this is probably one of the best samurai in the set, if not the block.
I really like this card. I think it's very fun.
A really good one, and I think I rated him as playable. He's almost an auto include now that I'm sort of reading it all aloud.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the power on this is it's not extraordinary, but like if you
No.
contrast him with the Mothrider Samurai, first he pulls you into a deck in a way that's fun, and then second, yeah, I mean he's a 4 mana 4/4 when he gets blocked. That's not nothing in Kamigawa. That's pretty solid stat line.
Well, when he gets blocked, he's a 5/5 because
He triggers on himself. You're right.
he buffs himself with the ability, and he's got Bushido.
He's a 5/5. I mean, that's extraordinary. Holy cats!
That doesn't get better than that in this set.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Why are we even talking about it? Get this guy in the queue.
2 of them. Let's get 2 of them in.
Let's get 2 of them in. All right, I like having 2. That presents a slight tension. I presume this is gonna sound bad. I presume these white like ribbons floating on his back are some kind of traditional thing or callback. But to be honest, when I was 14 looking at this set, I just thought they looked like toilet paper.
Well,
it looks like he got TP'd.
I completely agree with that, and I think it was probably around that time when our house did get TP'd.
And that's
people
right.
Did put toilet paper in
this awakened trauma. Yeah,
people did TP a tree like outside our house. It looked like what Nagao is wearing on his back.
Yeah, to take a slight detour. So we grew up in a sort of modernist house, very unique house that has big kind of curving living room, and it's all white. It's very 50s. And it looks, honestly, for all the world from the street, like a toilet. And so it was often called the toilet house. And I'm actually amazed we didn't get TP'd more often. I think it only happened 2 or 3 times.
It should have happened more. It's just too perfect.
All right. Auto include 2. We love Nagao. EDH Rec does not. There's only 9 decks, sadly.
That's pretty good for an uncommon samurai from Kamigawa.
Yeah, but how is he beaten by Masako the Humorless? I mean, come on.
I don't know why anyone is using Masako as their commander. I'm not going to argue against Masako.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about Otherworldly Journey. This is 1 and a W for an instant arcane. Remove target creature from the game. At end of turn, return that creature to play under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So 2 mana, blink a thing, and it comes back with a 1/1 counter. I think it's kind of meh. I think it has an interesting place in Magic's history as one of the earliest white blink effects, which has gone on to become a really iconic central part of white. The problem with blinking in this set is there's basically nothing to blink. There's only a handful of enter the battlefield effects in the set. You know, there's the Myojin, which you could refresh their counter, I guess.
Well, no, you can't.
Oh no, they got to come in from your hand. No. Okay, so there's essentially nothing because the other one is there's a cycle from Saviors that ends in Ona, and they're all terrible.
No. They're so bad.
So there's just nothing. It seems like a decent card, but there's nothing to blink for value, and so all this really gets you is saving a creature from removal and getting a counter, which I don't know if that's quite worth a card.
What it really gets you is some incredible art.
Yeah, it sure does. Talk about it.
Boy, where to start with this? So this is an arcane card, so it's supposed to be, kind of a spirit spell that's being cast here. On the left side of the art is what looks like this sort of giant tortoise dragon spirit creature that is, I guess, breathing out some haze,
some time or something,
some haze,
some magic
toward a lone warrior standing on the edge of a cliff. And within that time haze that he's breathing is basically the moon. It basically looks like the moon.
Exactly. He's going to the moon, or like, I guess now that you've educated me that the land around Eiganjo is cratered like this, he's going to some extra, devastated version of the Eiganjo landscape where everything has been obliterated.
Yeah, but it's basically the moon. It's nighttime in
blue
this
moon
in this other world that the tortoise is breathing. But it's just a really, really beautiful and cool piece of art.
Yeah, I hadn't really heard of this or noticed Vance Kovac's name before as an artist, and I'm scrolling through his Scryfall list, and he's done a few other pieces that are somewhat notable, like the cards may be more notable, like Sudden Shock, the original Verdant Catacombs, Burst Lightning, but this is the only one that really jumps out at me as just, wow, this is a stunningly cool piece. This is an awesome piece of art.
Yeah.
I love this turtle. It's like So scary.
It reminds me of Shadow of the Colossus, honestly.
Oh, it's totally got that vibe with the lone hero.
Yeah, and these sort of tiny glowing eyes on this massive turtle.
Yeah, and kind of like Shadow of the Colossus, to be honest, in this picture, I identify with the turtle, not the lone warrior. Like, I'm kind of rooting for the turtle.
I didn't really
here.
notice the warrior at first.
Yeah. It's awesome. Awesome art. I don't know if we include this card, to be honest. I think it probably wouldn't be totally embarrassing, but I feel like this is always like the second, like you have 42 cards in the deck. You need to cut 2. This is the 42nd card you cut, and then you have to make a harder decision. You know what I mean? Like, does this ever make the deck?
Yeah, I mean, I really think the problem is there's no point in flickering in this set. There's nothing to flicker, and we kind of talked about this when we were looking at Hikari Twilight Guardian earlier on. Like, it's a cool ability and one that is going to become much more relevant in white in the future, but in Kamigawa, it's just not. Doesn't really have any kind of benefit outside of this +1/+1 counter. So I gave this.
Yeah, there's just no support.
I gave this playable, but I think we should just cut it. Honestly,
yeah, let's just cut it. It's interesting that they even included it. You know, like I guess it has the removal saving aspect, but it's just weird to have this in a set that has no ETB abilities at all. Like even in Astral Slide, you know, kind of the original flicker blink effect 2 years earlier. Like there's a lot more in Onslaught block that lets you play with enter the battlefield value than in Kamigawa block.
All right, so next up we have Pious Kitsune, 2W for a 1/2 Fox Cleric. This is a strange one, so bear with me here. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a devotion counter on Pious Kitsune. Then, if a creature named 8.5 Tails is in play, you gain 1 life for each devotion counter on Pious Kitsune. He also has tap, remove a devotion counter from Pious Kitsune. You gain 1 life. So this is a card that synergizes specifically with 8.5 Tails, who we talked about earlier, and basically can slowly gain you a bunch of life if you happen to have both Pious Kitsune and 8.5 Tails in play at the same time. And then also has this minor tap ability that, you know, lets you gain a little bit of life even if the head Kitsune 8.5 Tails is not in play. Ugh.
I hate this card.
Do not like it at all. This I've never liked this sort of like named card specific synergy. Like this feels like a Yu-Gi-Oh card to me.
Yes.
Like naming this one specific other card that you need to have in play for this to be even a little bit viable, and even then, probably not viable.
Yeah, it cuts to me that the naming a specific card like cuts against the thing that makes Magic kind of unique among TCGs. Like coming from Pokemon and then Yu-Gi-Oh, that like Magic is built up of, it's like Lego. It's built of all these little building blocks that are all kind of flexible on their own, but the fun part is just the interactions among them and the, as Richard Garfield called it, emergent gameplay that you get.
Yeah.
And so I really don't like these cards that point at a specific card. It feels alien to the fundamental like design identity of Magic.
Right. It tells you exactly what card you're supposed to have in play to make this relevant, and that takes away kind of the most interesting part of the game.
Yeah, happily, I think we don't have a dilemma here because even ignoring that, the card itself is just awful. This is a terrible card. So it's 3 mana for a 1/2, and the base is you gain 1 life a turn at the cost of tapping it, incidentally. But even if you have 8.5 Tails, it's still bad. So so you play this on 3. Turn 4, you gain 1 life. Then turn 5, you gain 2 life. Turn 6, you gain 3. And like at any point, this could just die.
Getting pretty crazy here.
I know, this card is so bad. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Definite insta-cut.
Yeah, easy insta-cut. I do want to, like, this is a little long, but I look at Gatherer for each of these cards, and there's a very long comment on this card that I honestly can't tell if it's a joke or not, so I'm just going to read it and let you tell me. When you're running 8.5 Tails, which many times you generally just are in the first place, this card can be a powerful auxiliary. Sure, it takes a while to rev up, which, granted, pretty much takes it out of the running for DCI-managed legacy games. Just going to pause there. But you get this thing running into the late game, and you'll be getting a ridiculous amount of life every turn. Eventually, it just reaches the point where your opponent really can't hit you fast enough to stop the life gain. But the real kicker of all this is that your opponent can't even bolt your Pious Kitsune or do any other such nonsense. As for mere 3 mana, your 8.5 tails can make Pious Kitsune have protection from whatever color it is that's trying to screw with you. And after the 2 mana kick up, all it takes is just 1 mana for each spell. So if they try to double bolt you, it's just an extra mana to stop the second one. Like, I don't think this is joking, and I just like I can't parse, particularly a little aside about Legacy. I just love of like, yeah, this guy's probably not making the cut for Legacy. And I was just like, yeah, you think?
Probably not. He's just barely not making the varsity team.
Yeah, Kai Buddha almost put him in, and then he said, Pious Kitsune, as much as I love you, you're just not quite there.
Oh man, I'm trying to figure out what game this guy is playing where you would get to a point that Pious Kitsune is getting you enough life every turn that he matters, and that you have enough mana that you're wasting it to protect Pious Kitsune from bolts.
Maybe a lot of Kamigawa sealed. I don't know. Yeah. All right.
He won't be in this Kamigawa sealed.
All right. Let's talk about Quiet Purity. Quiet Purity, W, Instant Arcane, Destroy Target Enchantment. This is another one. I can't say anything about it. Like, at least Pious Kitsune provokes a reaction for me. This is just like, this card exists. Yeah. You could put it in a deck, I guess.
We talked about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just want to cut it. Why would I ever want this?
Just an insta cut. I guess it's arcane, but there's enough enchantment hate in white that we don't need a card that does nothing but that.
As an aside, there is a lot of enchantment hate in this era of Magic in white. Like, Onslaught block has a ridiculous amount. I think Mirrodin, I don't know how much Mirrodin has, but then Kamigawa comes in strong with yet more enchantment hate. I don't really understand why this was so important to white's identity. All right. Instacut.
Nice, easy one. Next card is Reciprocate. 1 white mana for an instant. Remove from the game target creature that dealt damage to you this turn. I really like this card, and it always seemed really, really powerful to me back in the day when we started playing Magic, especially when we got into Kamigawa, and there's so many weak cards. Here is this card that for just 1 white mana, not just gets rid of a creature, but completely exiles it for just 1 mana. I'll note that I had no idea at this time that Swords to Plowshares existed. And I wasn't really thinking that carefully about the fact that you have to let the creature deal damage to you first before you can reciprocate. But still, 1 white mana. I still think it's very playable in our cube too.
Yeah, I think it's totally playable. It's definitely not Swords to Plowshares, and we could talk more about that. But, I was thinking about it. Was there a Swords to Plowshares printed between this and Swords to Plowshares? I think this was the first time that Wizards kind of tiptoed back into the Swords for Plowshares design space. Yeah, I'm looking at Gather History. There was Unified Strike from Onslaught, which exiles an attacking creature if its power is less than or equal to the number of soldiers, which is somehow much worse than this. But I think this was the first kind of real attempt at a Swords to Plowshares type single white mana exile a thing removal spell since Swords to Plowshares went out of standard print.
Interesting.
So that's kind of cool. Yeah, I think this is just an auto include. Okay, so disadvantages. You have to get a hit first. That means you're not hitting utility creatures. You can't use this, for example, to get rid of Kabuto Moth. It's not clearing the way offensively when you need to get in and close out the game. It's not that great to stabilize because again, they have to hit you first. So if it's a big creature, like you're gonna take some damage. But I think it's still an auto include. Like just the fact that it exiles alone. Like we're gonna talk about the first dragon here in a minute. And there are some powerful death triggers in Kamigawa that exiling it's really nice to have that ability.
Yeah. And there's just not that much hard removal in white in this block at all. So I think having this in there is a really good way to give white a little bit more power.
Yeah, I think this is pretty premium removal.
Yeah. How many should we have?
I was wondering that. It feels like 2 is the floor to me. Since we're doing multiples, I think having this kind of effect around is important. It's a good reason to be in white. I'm flirting with 3. I wonder if that's oppressive to have that many swordsy effects running around.
I kind of like starting with 3 because I think that the drawback, like this is not Swords to Plowshares.
No.
And the many drawbacks of having to take damage from the creature that you did a great job of listing out, I think would not make it too oppressive even if one person gets all 3 copies.
Yeah, all right. I like including 3. One other thing that's funny about this card is it seems like such a staple. Like you just read it and it's a simple, clean design, fits right in. Doesn't seem, it's certainly not at risk of being overpowered. Strangely, it's only been reprinted once. It was in a single dual deck. It was in the Knights versus Dragons dual deck in 2011, and it's never been reprinted since in a standard set or anything else. And I'm not sure if that's because it's a little too good or way too weak. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
All right, let's throw 3 of them in.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about Reverse the Sands. 6 WW for a sorcery. Redistribute any number of players' life totals. Each of those players gets 1 life total back. This card is incredibly unique. I also think it has maybe the most confusing Oracle or printed rules text of maybe not of any card. It's no Chains of Mephistopheles, but I found this card incredibly confusing. So the way it works is if my life total is 10 and yours is 17, I can trade them. So I have 17 and you have 10. Now, to me, it reads more naturally as like we add them up and then I can redistribute the total, right. But it doesn't work that way. And I've always found that just really counterintuitive.
Absolutely. The first time I read this card many, many moons ago was like redistribute means you take everything from everybody and then you redistribute it the way that you want to. So it looks like what it should do is let you set yourself to, assuming you're both at 20, set yourself to 39 and your opponent to 1. Yeah, I agree. It's very, very confusing.
And it's also funny because it has reminder text that does, to my mind, nothing to clarify the central point of confusion. So the reminder text, again, is each of those players gets 1 life total back, which, like, as reading it, you're not confused about do the players get a life total back because duh. It should say like
they'll get some kind of life total.
Yeah, it's a really confusing card in that sense. It is cool. I mean, there's no other effect in Magic that does anything even close to this.
With good reason.
Yeah, it's definitely not going in the cube for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah.
Should we enumerate why this isn't workable or playable?
Yeah, I guess we can get into that a little bit more. I feel like it could be a cool political card in something like EDH, though it's definitely not a popular card even in that format. But the problem is, like, there's just too many things that need to line up for this card to reverse not only the sands, but reverse the course of the game for you. You and your opponent need to each have life totals that are going to be advantageous for you after the reversal. So your life needs to be very low. Your opponent ideally is going to have quite a bit of life so that when you do the swap, you end up with a lot, they end up with a little. But then you also need to have some way to actually finish them off.
This is what makes it so bad.
So you're spending 8 mana to set something up with basically no guaranteed win on any future turn. And chances are
no effect on
the board whatsoever. If your opponent is swinging at you with a bunch of creatures, they've already gotten you really low and they have a lot of life left themselves, which is the ideal, then you're probably still going to lose. This isn't going to give you a bunch of creatures.
Yeah, you're still losing the game.
This isn't going to suddenly stop you from taking damage on your next turn. You've just spent 8 mana buying yourself a little bit of time, maybe.
It's kind of, in a weird way, it's not that far from being an 8 mana fog.
Oh, man. You're right.
Like, because like if you put it in quadrant theory, right? So if you're ahead, it's terrible, right? Like this does nothing for you if it's ahead. If you're ahead, if you're at parity and trying to break a stalemate, again, this does very little. It might give you a very slight advantage in breaking parity, but not really because that's about the board. If you're in a race state, then I guess it might matter. If you and your opponent are both battling to get each other low, but again, if you're racing, probably your life totals are pretty close anyway. And then if you're behind, as we said, it still probably won't.
You're still behind.
Change the course of the game. Yeah, it's just a really bad card. Yeah, I think it's an insta-cut, even though it's a cool, unique card with a really cool name. I do like the name here quite a lot.
And pretty cool art, pretty cool idea behind the card, but pretty bad. Okay, our next card here is Samurai Enforcers. 4 WW for a 4/4 human samurai with Bushido 2. Nice and simple. Um, I I gave this card a meh only because it's a samurai and can benefit from the little bit of samurai synergy that we are seeing in this set. Um, but even with that said, this isn't even reliably a 6 mana 6/6. This is a 6 mana 4/4 that becomes a 6/6 only in combat, which means it's really not much of a threat for your opponent, and they have not much of an incentive to block these beefy enforcers.
So I was very down on this guy when I first read him, and then I decided to just do a quick Scryfall search to see how he stacks up against his fellow 6 drops.
Uh-huh.
And this shows Kamigawa block for you. So there's 35 6 drops in the block. Of those, if he gets into combat, he straight defeats 26 out of 35.
Wow.
So he beats like 80% of the 6 drops in the set. He trades with 7. He might lose to a single one, Masumaru. And then there's also himself, Samurai Enforcers, who he trades with. So he's like, he either beats or trades with every other 6 drop in the set, which is bizarre but true. Like he's Vizardrix essentially, and Vizardrix apparently is fine in Kamigawa.
Oh man,
right?
He's Vizardrix, but less of a clock on your opponent's slide.
Right? Yeah, he's Vizardrix, but with less.
Wow, that really says a lot about Kamigawa.
Now, despite our differing interpretations, it looks like we both landed on kind of a meh, let's throw 2 of them in and see what happens kind of verdict.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was only meh for me instead of Instacut because they're samurai, and I want samurai to work, and this is sort of the biggest base stat line that we see on a samurai. Throw a couple in.
Yeah, we can throw 2 in.
Sure.
I'll briefly note this guy has like one of my least favorite types of magic flavor text. So his flavor text is, from the moment they swore their oaths, they belong to their lord, sword, and soul. And I hate this kind of flavor text, not because it's bad per se, but just because it really says nothing. Like it might as just say samurai, 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 samurai. Like there's nothing about it that helps illustrate the world or tell a story or draw you in. It's just like, it just says nothing.
And it really doesn't line up with the art very well either, because the art, while it's pretty ugly, at least in my opinion,
yeah, I agree.
The art's pretty ugly, but it kind of tells maybe a story. These enforcers are 3 samurai, and it looks like they're sort of standing in a crowd of peasants, I guess, who
very haggard,
very haggard.
These peasants
they have suffered, and
they're all green.
They are green with suffering, and it looks like it looks like some of them are maybe begging. Some of the peasants are maybe begging the samurai for help or for food or for protection, who knows what. And the samurai are just, stoically ignoring them. So the art sort of suggests that these guys are, not the, they're not the most soft-hearted guys in the world.
And the name is Enforcer, right, which is like a mob connotation. Like they're kind of the thugs.
Yeah. So there's just sort of a weird mismatch happening between the flavor text and the art, and maybe also the name, and just it feels like a card where not a whole lot of thought went into how this card came together.
Yeah, they could have like told a story, for example, of like between their mean art and their mean name. Like they could have told a story around Konda here, like how he's become the samurai are no longer paying attention to the people's suffering. They've forgotten why they fight. Like there was an opportunity to do something
They've
here.
Forgotten what honor is. Yeah, so kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and it's especially tragic because this card is so iconic and widely played.
This is the card that people think of when we say Kamigawa, and it's sad that they didn't do more with it.
I'm not sure it's a card people think of if we said 6 mana samurai from Kamigawa with Bushido 2. I think they'd still struggle to bring it to memory. But he's still getting in the cube.
How many of him?
1, 2. I don't know. I wish I had a dice.
1. Nah, I said 2. Let's do 1.
All right, a single.
I mean, there's 3 of them on here already. There's 3 guys on the card.
That's true.
That's enough.
Well, that means we should play 3 copies, right? All right, 1. All right, let's talk about a much cooler samurai in every way. Samurai of the Pale Curtain. WW for a 2/2 Fox Samurai. Bushido 1. If a permanent would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. So a 2/2 Fox Samurai with Bushido 1 that exiles things when they die. This card is Dynamite. The art is amazing. The name is cool and evocative. And the stat line and playability and actually even the effect are all really good. Like this card is really good.
Yeah, I love this card. This is an easy, probably the easiest auto include so far.
Yeah, do we want to talk more about why it's so great?
Yeah, tell us about it.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll pontificate and then you pontificate. Right. How about that? All right. So my pontification. So first, in combat, this thing's pretty mean by Kamigawa standards. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is fine. It's a 3/3 when it tussles, which is great. It beats almost every other 2-drop in the set. And the exile is not chicken scratch. There are a lot of death triggers in Kamigawa. The dragons, of course, the soul shift creatures have death triggers. And so this actually shuts down quite a lot of interactions sort of for free. And in the deck you're probably in, the human or the samurai deck, you don't really care about your graveyard. You don't really have graveyard synergy. So it's pretty close to being a one-sided effect. So you've got just a straight like 2-mana 2/2 that is very hard to block and that really messes with your opponent's game plan. This is just a good card.
Right. And she also makes soul shift worse, not only because you're not getting the soul shift trigger when it's exiled, but you're not going to have as many spirits in the graveyard in the first place to bring back if they've all been exiled by Samurai of the Pale Curtain.
Oh, good point.
One of the things I really like about this card is how it does have this effect that actually matters and can be impactful, especially if you're going up against a spirit deck. And you're able to get it out pretty early and at a pretty low cost compared to so many of the other effects that we see in white, where they're glued to really expensive creatures and you're still not getting that much. Like this is a card that would be pretty valuable and pretty good even without this ability, but then you're not being punished for also having this ability on the card.
Yeah, there's a long pause there because as you were talking, I was just staring at the art and contemplating how badass she looks. Like it's also just really cool looking. Like this thing's it's got everything.
You had a note here about Disciple of the Vault Skull Clamp.
Yeah, so historical note. So this card was specifically crafted to be good at stopping Disciple of the Vault and Skull Clamp, and I believe modular and all the other sort of artifact deck shenanigans of Mirrodin block. For anyone who wasn't playing at this time or isn't aware of the competitive history, the block before Kamigawa, Mirrodin, the original Mirrodin block, is one of the most busted sets in Magic's history. It's possibly the worst standard in Magic's history, or very close, maybe along with the original Urza block standard. The artifact deck was terribly degenerate. It was incredibly fast. It had an incredibly strong, good kill. It was really resilient to interaction. And so this card, I think, was pushed pretty hard with the exile abilities and with the strong cost, just as a card that could potentially compete with the power and speed of that deck. I think that didn't ultimately prove necessary because the artifact deck had been nerfed pretty heavily before this card ever got to print because it was so good and so degenerate and unfun. But I suspect that's the reason why the rate is actually pretty good here, is that in general, this set shows a fear of Mirrodin and a desire to back away from the power creep of Mirrodin. But I think with this card, they felt like they had to make it a little more aggressively costed in order to have a chance against the decks it was trying to combat.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting way of countering that too. It's not just the sort of the most obvious artifact hate on a card. Right. It's something a little more subtle.
Yeah, great card. I feel like we should put 3 of them in. They might prove too good, if anything, but I like this card a lot.
Yeah.
Strangely, this card's never been reprinted, even though it has kind of an evergreen sort of graveyard hate ability. And I assume it's just because it has Bushido 1 on it. I feel like if it wasn't for that, we would have seen this card sneak into core sets or show up in the 18 years since it was printed.
If you listen to like Mark Rosewater or other people who were involved in the design or the development of this set, when they talk about Bushido and some of the other like very kind of parasitic mechanics that show up here, they seem very certain that these mechanics will never appear in any other set that's not Kamigawa. And of course now we have Neon Dynasty coming, but I think that any card with Bushido on it, any samurai, anything where the flavor is so specifically tied to this Japanese lore, they seem pretty adamant about not recreating those in a, unthematic set.
Yeah, I think it's notable we're revisiting Kamigawa, and the only keyword mechanic I think that's being reused is ninjutsu, which is the coolest. Ninjas are also cool. The pity with Bushido is the ability itself is very kind of evergreen, and you could see it fitting into all number of sets just as kind of a little
Right.
glue mechanic. But the name unfortunately limits it. Like if they just called this, I don't know, Warriors Honor or Combatsmanship or something.
They had just gone with Combatsmanship 1.
Yeah, Combatsmanship 1. We would be seeing this in every third set.
Okay. Cool. Let's go to our next samurai, who's also very cool. This is Sensei Golden-Tail. 1W for a 2/1 legendary fox samurai, who also has Bushido 1. As well as this ability. You can pay 1W and tap Sensei Golden-Tail to put a training counter on target creature. That creature gains Bushido 1 and becomes a samurai in addition to its other creature types. Play this ability only anytime you could play a sorcery. So Sensei Golden-Tail is a samurai who can basically train your other creatures to also become samurai. Really, really cool ability, flavorful, and just like actually a pretty good card just with its base stats and as written.
Yeah, this was the point in the review where I'm actually starting to get a little worried about how good the white weenie deck could be. This block in general is incredibly grindy, but we have a lot of really solid white, like 2-drops in particular, right? We just in this set, we haven't even looked at the next two. We have 8.5 Tails. We have this guy. We have Samurai the Pale Curtain we just reviewed. We have Konda's Hatamoto, who's fine. Like there are a lot of really solid aggressive 2-drops in the set, and I'm actually worried it could prove to be kind of an oppressive archetype.
I mean, it's hard for me to imagine an oppressive archetype in Kamigawa.
Well, but relative to the other
relative
archetypes,
to the rest of Kamigawa, yeah. I mean, I definitely think Sensei Golden-Tail still makes it in, but it'll be interesting to see how strong the white weenies end up being.
Yeah, I think the knob to turn there is the other white weenie cards like Samurai the Pale Curtain and stuff. Like I think if the deck proves too oppressive, like I can't cut this card entirely. It's too cool. But I could see just saying we can't have this many easy to grab white cheap creatures because it's just going to run away with the game. I do feel like we should dig a little more into just the power of this card. So 2 mana, 2/1 with Bushido 1 is already quite solid. It can attack in pretty effectively. It's not double designated, unlike Samurai the Pale Curtain and 8.5 Tails, so it's a lot easier on your mana. But the ability itself is really, I think, pretty good because it stacks and it can even target itself. So, if you can't attack in with Sensei Golden-Tail, just end of their turn, throw another counter on him. Now he gets to Bushido 2. Throw another counter. He's got Bushido 3, and you can do that with any of your creatures. That's a pretty good ability with a lot of.
It is a little bit limited though because you can only use that ability anytime you could play a sorcery. So it does have to be on your turn.
Snap.
Yeah, you can't.
See, I'm not reading the cards today, you can't. This is a fail.
You got to read them. That's the thing. That's how you win the games.
Yeah, it helps.
Read the cards.
All right. See, I'm learning a lot here, readers, about reading or listeners.
So you can't do the end of your opponent's turn buff him up thing. So it is a little bit of a tricky choice that you have to make. Do I want to spend this turn having Sensei Golden-Tail buff himself or buff someone else or swing in? Which I think makes it a little bit more, obviously makes it worse, makes it a little more interesting, but still really powerful by the standards of this set.
Yeah, I still have this as maybe one of the top 3 or 4 white cards in this set.
Sure.
I think like Yosei, who we'll get to, is up there, Ghostly Prison, Reciprocate, but I think Sensei Golden-Tail is in the mix. One other thing that I love about this card, I'm pretty sure if I read it correctly that every time it uses the ability, the creature gains the samurai type. So if he uses it on himself, for example, he becomes a fox samurai.
That's awesome.
And he could theoretically be like a samurai, which is actually would go really well with our samurai enforcers flavor text.
It would. Well, we need to make them human samurai.
That's your goal. And the deck is to have all your creatures be samurais. EDH rec, we got 54 decks built around Sensei Golden-Tail, which seals low. I mean, I know he's not super powerful, but he's just cool. He's so cool. All right, Singleton?
Yeah, I think just one.
All right, let's talk about another cycle, the Zubera cycle. Silent-Chant Zubera. 1W for a 1/2 Zubera spirit. Yes, you heard that right. When Silent-Chant Zubera dies, you gain 2 life for each Zubera put into a graveyard from play this turn. I want you to go first on this because I think I might kill some dreams.
I really love the Zubera, and I tried very, very hard to build a Zubera deck. Actually, not back when this set was printed, but several years later, I tried to make a Zubera deck featuring the Zubera of every color. So we've got Silent-Chant Zubera, and then 4 more of these wonderful guys in each of the other colors coming up. And it is a real struggle to make a 5-color deck that that works in any sense of the word.
Especially in this block.
Especially in this block. And this is not one of the most critical Zubera to that strategy. So there's a card coming up later on that we'll see called Devouring Greed, a black card that basically makes all of these Zubera work. I'll save the full Zubera discussion until we get to that card, but basically the idea is that you use that to sacrifice a bunch of these Zubera, and your opponent loses life, you gain life, and you wipe them out with a big wave of dying Zubera.
So am I hearing you say we're going to put a pin in the full Zubera discussion until we get to Devouring Greed?
I think that's the right way to do it.
Okay, all right.
What do you think?
I'm okay with that.
All right.
So can we even grade this? Do we have to come back and grade this later?
We might have to have a separate Zubera episode.
Can we? Can we have a micro episode just on the Zubera?
I'm fine with that. I think we should have a micro Zubera Devouring Greed episode. Sure.
All right. I'm just going to save my feelings. Let's just call it a build around for now.
Let's put a pin in it.
All right.
All right. Our next card is Takeno, Samurai General. 5W for a 3/3 legendary human samurai with Bushido 2. And each other samurai you control gets +1/+1 for each point of Bushido it has. So this is, I think, the strong, or the closest that we see in this set to kind of just an anthem type, like universal buff to your samurai, or just creatures in general. There aren't that many buffs like this in this block. So I think that Takeno definitely has a place in like a samurai deck if we could make that come together.
Yeah, I think this guy definitely gets in. I think the power is kind of okay. I mean, but on the other hand, if you compare, we're not going to have that many mediocre white 6-drops. And if you choose, like, do you want Takeno Samurai General, or do you want our buddies, where'd they go? Samurai Enforcers. It's like Takeno wins every time. This guy's so cool.
So he's got to be in.
Yeah, I also love the art here. It kind of looks like a movie poster for a like 1960s samurai film or something. It's really like red and just poppy, and it's just really cool.
Yeah, I wish I had more to say about this card, but it was one that I always wanted and never got back in the day. Like, Samurai deck was probably the first Kamigawa deck that I tried to put together back when this set came out, and I always wanted Takeno because he seemed like he was the glue that would make everything come together and make all my samurai so strong.
Yeah, I think EDH Rec agrees with you. This guy has 112 decks, which is more than any card we've talked about so far.
Not bad. Yeah, and I feel like, obviously a 6-mana 3/3 is not
even by Kamigawa standards.
Not the greatest stat line, even by Kamigawa standards. He would die to Samurai Enforcers in a head-on battle.
His own Enforcers.
But there's 3 of them.
There's
3 Enforcers and only 1 Takeno.
That's true.
So
that's true.
It makes sense. What I really like about this card is it turns Bushido from just what's honestly mostly a defensive mechanic into something a lot more dangerous and a lot more powerful. And it rewards you for really sticking to this Bushido samurai archetype, like really following the way of the warrior.
I love that.
And I like it.
Yeah, one other thing I like about this is most Lord effects of this era affect everybody and benefit everybody. So we saw an example earlier, for instance, with Pious Kitsune, which doesn't say if you control 8.5 tails, it says if there is an 8.5 tails in play. And for some reason, Wizards often did this. Yeah, it's weird, right? But this Takeno only benefits your samurai, which is nice. And I know some older players kind of preferred the Lord pattern of everything gets buffed, but from a play perspective, particularly in a set like this, that's heavily tribal with not that many tribes, and where stalemates are incredibly common, it really helps break a stalemate and actually let you finish a game.
Yeah, this is one of the few finishers that we're seeing in white.
All right, nice. Get him in.
Get him in there.
All right, next up we have Tarashi's Cry. 3W for a sorcery, arcane, note sorcery, tap up to 3 target creatures. So I went through a little bit of a journey in my head when I first read this, saying, I mean, the rate's pretty bad, but you could use it to surprise your opponent ahead of their combat. You could use it for da 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 da. And then I reread it and realized it was a sorcery. See, I do actually read the cards.
This sorcery thing, I think, is a bit of a weak point for you in your reading comprehension.
Ouch. Well, they should. There's a lot of cards that should be instants, Connor. I'm just saying.
That is true.
This thing absolutely should be an instant. It would still be terrible, but it at least would be worth talking about. But as a sorcery, I don't want any part in this.
Mm-mm. At least it's arcane.
Yeah, the arcane spells in white are really bad. I feel like we've had like 4, like almost every sorcery and instant we've talked about in white, we've said at least it's arcane, but let's cut it anyway.
I do want to note the flavor text on this card. It says, the Sun Kami, Tarashi, is terrible to behold. When its temper flares, best seek shade and pray for forgiveness, because otherwise you might get tapped.
Yeah, you might get really sleepy.
You might not be able to participate in combat next turn.
It kind of sounds like a nice afternoon nap almost. That's what happens when Tarashi shouts.
You're just getting a little kiss from the Sun Kami.
Huh. Yeah, Tarashi himself is interesting because the name is referenced in 3 separate card titles, but has never been printed as its own card. I suppose that's because...
Oh, we never see him.
Yeah, I don't know. Cut it.
Cut it. All right, next up is Vassal's Duty, 3W for an enchantment. And it says, pay 1 colorless mana. The next 1 damage that would be dealt to target legendary creature you control this turn is dealt to you instead. So what this card does is essentially makes you the vassal of your legendary creature.
Yes.
Or any legendary creature you control. And you take damage for them, which is kind of a cool and interesting ability, but is one that I'm not sure is really any good.
No, it's not.
At least at this cost.
I started to believe that it might be good because I was thinking, well, lets you kind of control how combat plays out. There's a lot of legends that you'll just have incidentally in play. You can set things up so you win every legend v creature combat. I just went on, and then I went to like kind of sanity check myself on Gatherer, for example, and this is rated 1.054 out of 5 on Gatherer, which I believe is almost the lowest rating you could have. Now I don't put much stock in Gatherer ratings, but I think I'm on like high. This card is just bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, I think the fact that you have to, you're not just taking the damage, but you also need to spend 1 mana for each damage you're preventing.
Yeah.
I think is a real problem, especially since the card already costs 4 to put into play.
Yeah.
You're saving your mana to save your legendary creature, and not making proactive plays.
Yeah, if this came in for like 2 to cast, I think it might be interesting to talk about. But at 4, it's not. I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, the art's a little bit interesting though. I think what's being pictured here is Nagao, a samurai who we're apparently very fond of and just talked about a little bit ago. Mm-hmm. We have Nagao bound by honor bowing to Konda, Lord of Eiganjo. So it's kind of a cool callback to both of those cards.
Oh, is that what's going on? I've always found the art just, to me, it looks like Konda's about to beat him, which maybe he is because of the damage. It doesn't look like Konda. He's got this.
Yeah, he's holding up a club.
Jeez, Konda.
I mean, that may be what's happening here. That's his duty.
That's why. The other thing about this card is, as you kind of nodded at, and as some Gatherer comments point out very strongly, the flavor of this card is just bizarre. Like, am I the vassal of this legendary creature? Like, I'm the all-powerful planeswalker who brought you into existence.
That's right. Why am I taking the damage?
It's not my duty to get beaten.
Who's the vassal here?
Yeah, it's really awkward. Like, if it was somehow reversed, so it's like Lord's duty, like I am protecting them as my vassals. I don't know. It's just really awkward.
Yeah.
Boo.
Awkward card all around. Let's cut it.
All right, let's talk about Vigilance. No, not the keyword, the card. Vigilance. W. Enchantment aura. Enchanted creature has Vigilance.
We talked about Vigilance.
And here it is. Okay, first, this card is not good. We're not including it, right? We just agree?
Yeah, that's no.
Okay. So talking about the design then, Wizard seems to have had a rule that when you introduce a new keyword, you have to have a 1-mana aura that grants it. Like Alpha is just littered with it. There's like 7 cards in Alpha that are like, like they give haste, or they give, I don't know if they give haste. They give flying, they give trample. There's all these cards that just give a keyword and nothing else. And I guess Wizards felt they had to nod at that, or like the players would only understand Vigilance if they had a card called Vigil. Like, I don't know why this card exists. It's blatantly unplayable.
Yeah, just really bad. But in case you missed that Vigilance was being added to the set, here's a whole card that literally just says Vigilance. Here it is.
It's just kind of cute. I like that symmetry, I guess.
Yeah.
This card absolutely clogged my I didn't really have a bulk section of my collection back then because every card was precious. But even then, it was like, why do I have so many copies of this card?
I don't think this card was precious to us even then.
No, I don't think it's been precious to anyone.
No. Goodbye. Happy to cut it here.
Yeah, we're in danger of ending White on a down note, but luckily I think you're about to introduce our savior.
I think we're going to end on a high here. Our final card in White is Yosei the Morning Star, 4WW for a 5/5 legendary dragon spirit. That's right, we're on our first legendary dragon. Yosei has flying, and when Yosei is put into a graveyard from play, target player skips his or her next untap step. Tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. Thank you. This is a 6-mana 5/5 flyer in Kamigawa, which is good enough already. And then it's a dragon on top of that for a little extra badassitude. And it has this actually like pretty good go to the graveyard effect.
Yeah, it's almost a time walk. It's like at least half of a time walk.
Yeah, great card. Probably, I think we can probably agree this is the best card in White.
Yeah, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that all of the dragon spirits are going to make it into the cube, because it'd be madness not to. Yeah, I think it's probably the best card in White. I mean, I think there's an argument for something a little cheaper, but no, I think it just on raw power, this must be the most powerful White card in the set. Like 6-mana 5/5 flyer, exceptional then, still solid now, still totally reasonable. And then that ability is really powerful.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of the other kind of tricksy White cards that we've seen so far, or I guess this is the last White card, so we've seen all the White cards, but unlike a lot of the other ones we've seen, Yosei does have an impact on the board that you can control, at least in some sense. You are, forcing your opponent to lose the ability to kill you probably on their next turn by tapping up to 5 permanents. So you're, preventing lethal damage potentially. You're setting up lethal for yourself when it goes to the graveyard. One of the things that's really cool about all of these dragons, they all have this death effect, is they create this nice damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation that your opponent then has to deal with. So this is a 5/5 flyer, which is definitely for this set a very quick clock that your opponent has to be afraid of. But so they want to get rid of it, but then if they do, they're going to be punished by this disastrous effect on their board state. And all of the dragon spirits create this really cool, really threatening situation for your opponent.
Yeah, this is one of the funny things about Kamigawa is it's generally quite weak, and then there are just a handful of really strong cards in the set. Like the dragons are EDH all-stars. They have been basically since EDH became a popular format. This card is, interestingly, only the 5th most played White card in the set on Cube Cobra, beaten by Cage of Hands, Otherworldly Journey, which I'm now starting to feel sweaty about cutting, Ghostly Prison, and Isamaru. This card is it's an all-star. It's still super playable 18 years later. It's cool. It's got great art. It looks really fun. Just a great card.
Yeah. One other thing about the dragons, just from kind of a set design or flavor perspective, is that Yosei and the other 4 dragons were sort of consciously put into this set as a kind of recognition anchor for people. So we've seen all of these Kami so far in white, and we'll see plenty more of them in other colors that are just super weird looking, that don't have a lot of things that at least a Western audience would recognize just from looking at the art as being distinctively Japanese, or, you know, as really being distinctively anything. So we have all of these weird Kami, and then the dragon spirits are here as this super recognizable archetype of not just Japanese mythology, but really all kinds of mythology where we see dragons. So these dragon spirits, among all these other bizarre Kami that are floating around, here these dragon spirits come, and they're super iconic and just instantly recognizable to, you know, anyone that really has any kind of familiarity with just fantasy.
That's really cool. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's an awesome high note to go out on. I think we include only one of these, you know, A, because it's legendary, and B, because I think including more would be kind of oppressive.
I think so. Yeah, I think one Yosei and probably one of each dragon going forward.
Well, it's been an up and down journey, but it's great to end on a high note with Yosei. If you have any feedback, thoughts, or memories to share about any of the cards or topics today, please email us at clockspinningpodcast@gmail.com. And we'd welcome test drafts of the cube. Check for the link in the show notes. And if you do draft it, send us an email so we can shout you out. We're really grateful for... No! It's the Samurai Enforcers! I'm honor bound to answer. So I guess until next time, I'm Austin.
I'm Connor.
Thanks again for listening.